Chapter 119. Buddha Mountain suffered a calamity. The light that had lasted for thousands of years completely dissipated between heaven and earth with the collapse of the great Buddha. This was the darkest day of the Buddha kingdom. Thousands of Buddhists looked in the direction of the holy mountain, kneeling and crying. Demons appeared in the world, and Buddha could not do anything. Was the pure land of the Buddha kingdom about to fall into a terrible night? Why had their Buddha not returned yet? The Buddhists who worshipped the false Buddha had long lost their hearts and could not withstand the slightest blow. They fell into despair and panic on this night when the Buddha was destroyed. On the mountain, beside the collapsed stone statue, 300 imperial guards sat on the ground and adjusted their breathing. Their blood-stained faces were as determined as before. Even if the future was bumpy, even if life and death were at stake, they still did not give up. As always, they trusted their Lord and the Empress in the distance. In the heavenly mandate palace, Zhang Sun sat on a side seat beside the dragon throne. She had not slept or rested for several days. Under the phoenix crown, her beautiful eyes were now bloodshot, but she still persisted. Piles of memorials had been piled up on the table, especially the battle reports from the southwest of Great Xia. One would be sent every half a day. She had heartlessly sent him to that battlefield. How could she not feel guilty? How could she not be worried? She was not a cold-hearted person. However, compared to the millions of commoners in the southwest of Great Xia, her personal feelings were so insignificant. She could only sacrifice him, sacrifice the person she trusted the most. More than half a month had passed, and he did very well. Those bald donkeys of the Buddha kingdom did not take half a step forward, and Great Xia also got a brief respite. These days, the northern Meng army in front of Beichui city stopped. Since the defeat of the disciples of the Buddha kingdom, Fan Lingyue had restrained himself. The negotiations between the two dynasties were still going on, and there seemed to be no room for reconciliation. It seemed that everything was going in the direction of Great Xia. Now, the most important thing was to elect a new emperor and stabilize the situation of Great Xia as soon as possible. An hour later, a letter was sent out from the heavenly mandate palace and flew quickly in the direction of the Buddha kingdom. Du-Yi Temple on Mount Mijie was the most mysterious and sacred place in the Buddha kingdom. Today, blasphemers stepped in and wanted to destroy the foundation of Buddhism. Ning Chen led little Mingyu into the hall. What entered his eyes was a dignified Buddha with a dazzling golden body. The size of the Buddhist hall was unimaginable. It was hard to believe that such a huge Buddhist temple was built on Mijie Mountain. Even in the future, this was almost impossible. In the main hall, the relics of the past supreme experts of the Buddhist sect were placed there. They shone with a golden light and looked extraordinary. Ning Chen stepped forward and looked at the 13 relics. He stretched out his hand and examined them for a long time, but he didn't find anything special about them. He couldn't help but frown slightly. With a wave of his hand, he put them all away. What's the use of this stone? Mingyu asked, puzzled. I don't know. Who cares? Let's take it first. Ning Chen shook his head and replied. It was said that the Buddhist cultivation method was different from that of ordinary martial artists. After cultivating to the transformative realm, one's golden body would be indestructible. Even after passing away, one could still infuse one's cultivation into the Sarira. However, this was only a legend. He did not know whether it was true or not. These monks were already so hard when they were alive that they could not be cut. After they died, the stones they formed were also incomparably hard. It was unknown what they were used for. The two of them searched the main hall for a long time, but they didn't find anything else that could be taken away. Little Mingyu took away a small wooden mallet in front of the Buddha. Ning Chen saw that the mallet had been taken away, so he simply put away the wooden fish. After searching the front hall, the two of them went to the back hall. This was the place where the Buddhist disciples rested. After a simple search, they found some pills and conveniently put them away. The last place they went to was the residence of the Du-Yi Temple's abbot. However, before they could step in, they were stopped by a strong force. They couldn't even take half a step closer. We can't go in. What should we do? Mingyu stretched out her small hand and touched the invisible barrier in front of her. Ningchen also stretched out his hand to feel it. He immediately felt a little depressed. The strength of this restriction was at least above the innate stage to break it. Although he was already at the middle stage of the 9th stage, he was still some distance away from the innate stage. It would probably be difficult for him to break this restriction in a short time. Mingyu, step back. I'll try. Ningchen asked little Mingyu to step back. He then pulled out his black sword and prepared to smash it with brute force. Mingyu obediently stepped back more than 10 meters and said in a crisp voice, "Okay, you can start." Ningchen prepared for a moment and immediately slashed with his sword. In the next moment, there was a loud bang. Golden light shone brightly and the ground shook. The soldiers on Mijia Mountain were startled by this sudden sound. They all looked behind the Du-Yi temple to see what their leader was doing. The restriction shook and then quickly calmed down. It was completely fine. Ningchen shook his numb arm. This thing was so resistant to smashing. It was a bit difficult to deal with. It wasn't that he didn't have a way to break this restriction. The sand sword that the senior gave him could definitely break this turtle shell. However, this was a gift that he had left for that old bald donkey. How could he waste it here? Can you open it? Little Mingyu shouted and asked. No problem. Wait a little longer. Ningchen worked harder. Little Mingyu was still watching from the side. He couldn't embarrass himself. Wasn't it just a broken restriction? He couldn't beat an innate stage expert. He couldn't even open a restriction set by an innate stage expert. After a while, there was a loud bang on Mijia Mountain. Many of the Imperial Army soldiers who weren't seriously injured were curious and unconsciously looked at the leader of the Imperial Army who was still recuperating. If you want to go, then go. The leader of the Imperial Army didn't open his eyes and said calmly. After receiving permission, everyone immediately stood up and ran in the direction of the sound. Not long after, a large group of soldiers stood in front of the old monk's residence. They looked at their leader who was unscrupulously slashing at a faint golden light in front of them. Mingyu took a piece of dried beef from a soldier's hand and put it into her mouth. She chewed on it in boredom. How long would he take? The surrounding soldiers were curious and waited beside little Mingyu. They were not unfamiliar with the little emperor of northern Meng and didn't have any bad feelings. After all, the war between the two dynasties couldn't be blamed on a child. If a child could make decisions for the matters of the northern Meng imperial court, Great Xia wouldn't have to fight so hard. The rumbling in front of the old monk's residence continued. Everyone was tired of watching and sat with little Mingyu, eating the dry rations they had brought with them as they waited in boredom. How much longer? After a while, Mingyu was a little sleepy, but she couldn't fall asleep because of the loud noise. Thus, she impatiently shouted and urged Ningchen. Soon. Ningchen turned his head and replied. When he saw the group of people sitting behind him, he couldn't help but jump in fright. Why had all these people come? Marquis, do you need help? A soldier mustered up his courage and asked. However, he didn't seem to have any intention of moving. That's right, Marquis. If you need help, don't hesitate. Seeing someone take the lead, the rest of the soldiers also started to jeer. Ningchen looked at these people with disdain. They only knew how to boast. If they had the ability, then come at me for real. Just sit and watch. This Marquis will definitely break it open. Ningchen felt that his dignity had suffered a setback. Even these people dared to mock him. Today, he had to break open this tortoise shell to regain his face. Rumbling sounds rang out again. Ningchen made up his mind. No matter what, he couldn't lose face in front of his subordinates. Sword after sword smashed down even more violently. 4 hours later, the sky was about to brighten. An Imperial Guard soldier ran over and shouted, "Marquis, there's a letter from the Imperial Palace." Ning Chen glanced at the restriction that was already very dim. Taking the letter, he turned around and sat down next to little Mingyu. He carefully read it. The soldiers also quieted down. They didn't know what news the Empress from the Imperial Palace had sent. "Reinforcements will arrive in about 10 days. The Empress wants us to hold on." Ning Chen glanced at the first half of the letter and raised his head to inform everyone. This letter was written the day before yesterday. It took more than a day to send it here. Counting the days, they indeed still needed to wait for about 10 days. The soldiers didn't have any happy expressions, but they also didn't have any dejection. 10 days was a bit long for them. However, they just had to hold on. In the second half of the letter, Zhang Sun focused on the situation in the Imperial City and Northern Meng. The situation in the Imperial City still hadn't changed much. The competition between the two princes had already reached its climax. It wasn't the first time that the three dukes had argued, but they still couldn't reach a consensus. What he was most concerned about was the excessive calmness of Northern Meng's army. Although the negotiations between the two dynasties were still ongoing, he didn't believe it at all. In this world, he was the person who understood Fan Lingyue the most. He was very clear that Northern Meng would definitely not retreat. The situation that was gradually easing up now was undoubtedly an illusion. Fan Lingyue seemed to be imperceptibly influencing everyone in Great Xia to convey an attitude. There was a possibility of negotiation between the two dynasties. He was now far away in the Buddhist kingdom and still wasn't sure what exactly Fan Lingyue was thinking. However, this illusion was definitely a huge hidden danger for Great Xia. "Someone, bring me a brush and ink." Thinking of this, Ning Chen opened his mouth and said, "Yes." The soldier waiting at the side bowed respectfully. Immediately, he turned around and walked towards the main hall. There was no lack of writing materials in the hall. In a short while, the brush and ink were brought over. Ning Chen took the brush and ink and immediately wrote down his suggestion. In the letter, he repeatedly emphasized for Zhang Sun to handle the matters in the Imperial City carefully. In particular, he had to be extra careful with Fan Lingyue and not believe in any illusion of peace. At the end of the letter, he briefly explained everything that had happened. He told Zhang Sun not to worry and that he could still hold on. Send the letter back to the Imperial Palace immediately. Ning Chen folded the letter and handed it to the Imperial soldier beside him. "Yes, sir." The soldier received the order and quickly left. After such a torment, everyone was no longer in the mood to find joy in the midst of suffering. Similarly, Ning Chen didn't want to delay any longer. He walked to the front of the restriction and raised his cultivation to the peak. The sky was filled with snowflakes, the ink sword vibrated, and frost quickly condensed. The sword light that came crashing down heavily slashed on the restriction. The golden light that was already extremely dim finally couldn't withstand this powerful force and shattered with a bang. Chapter 120. With the seal broken, little Mingyu's eyes lit up and her sleepiness disappeared. She got up and ran over. The surrounding Imperial Army soldiers were also curious. They also wanted to see just what was so special about this mortal Buddha's residence. Ning Chen pushed open the wooden door in front of him and lit a candle. He discovered that the furnishings of the room were much simpler than he had imagined. There was a bed, a table, and a chair. There was nothing else. In front of the door, the Imperial Army soldiers lost most of their interest. This rundown room was even worse than the rooms of those little monks. Ning Chen looked around, carefully searching for clues. He was not like those idiots behind him. He was not stupid enough to believe that this old bald donkey's room was as simple as it looked. Only an idiot would waste the energy to set up a seal in a rundown room with nothing. He had spent most of the night breaking open this turtle shell. He had to at least get something out of it. "Marquis, what are you looking for?" one of the idiots asked. A mechanism or a secret door, Ning Chen casually replied as he knocked on the bed. These people's intelligence was hopeless. He could not count on them. It was more reliable to do it himself. There was nothing on the bed. After lifting it up, he could see everything. There were no hidden compartments, and it did not seem like he was knocking on the wall. The sound was very solid and there was no muffled echo. Not far away, little Mingyu was also using her little mallet to knock and help search. She was not like those idiots who only knew how to stare. Is there a roof? After searching for a while, Mingyu raised her head and suggested. Ning Chen and the Imperial Army soldiers instinctively raised their heads. Perhaps there really was such a possibility. Lord Marquis, I'll do it. The idiot who had asked the question earlier volunteered. He stamped his foot and flew up, landing on the roof beam. He then began to search carefully. The group of people waited below. After looking up for a long time, their necks began to ache. The Imperial Army soldier on the roof beam jumped down and bitterly smiled while shaking his head. He had found nothing. Ning Chen was not disappointed. Thinking about it, there was no roof, no walls, and no bed. Then there was only the floor. Mingyu had clearly thought of this as well. She crouched down and began to knock on the floor with her little mallet. She seemed extremely focused. After a while, little Mingyu suddenly let out a soft cry of surprise, and the small wooden mallet in her hand kept knocking on the two floorboards under the table. Ning Chen walked forward, moved the table aside, and knocked on it carefully. He could tell that the sound of these two floorboards was obviously different from the rest of the room. Carefully lifting the stone slab, a flight of stairs appeared below. It looked like a dark room. Ning Chen took a candle and walked down the stairs. It was very dark at the bottom of the stairs. With the help of the candlelight, they could barely see the path. Mingyu followed behind carefully, not daring to take a single step. Some of the Imperial Army soldiers also followed them down. The group of old men couldn't help but feel a little nervous in the dark passageway as they followed closely behind. No one knew where this road led to. Anyway, it was very long. The group walked for a full 15 minutes. Light gradually appeared in front of them. It was very soft and milky white. It didn't look like moonlight, nor did it look like fire. As they walked closer, they could see clearly that these were luminous pearls embedded in the wall. Each pearl was the size of a walnut. After counting, there were as many as 17 pearls. Little Mingyu walked forward and looked at them eagerly. She wanted to touch them, but she couldn't reach them. She was only 7 years old and had yet to grow taller. Those at the back, leave a few people behind and dig these pearls away. Ning Chen said. Based on the principle of taking advantage of opportunities, it would be a waste not to take it. As long as there was something good, he was determined not to leave it for the enemy. Yes. 3 Imperial Army soldiers stayed behind. They pulled out their swords and began to dig at the wall with clanking sounds. Give me one, no, I want 2. Mingyu stretched out her fingers. After thinking for a while, she changed her mind. Okay. Ning Chen agreed readily. He had no use for these pearls. Other than giving them away, he would give them away. It didn't matter how many little Mingyu wanted. Under the soft white light, the passageway came to an end. 2 iron doors appeared in front of everyone. They were completely black and looked extraordinarily heavy. There were no locks on the doors, but they couldn't be pushed open. Without a doubt, there must be a mechanism controlling them. However, for a 9th rank expert, there was more than one way to open the door. Everyone back off. Ning Chen pulled out the sword behind his waist and waved his hand. He was too lazy to look for any mechanism. Wasn't it just a broken door? He could just cut it open. Everyone hurriedly retreated more than 10 steps. Little Mingyu even covered her ears. It seemed that she was afraid of the noise tonight. Seeing that everyone had retreated, Ning Chen moved the black sword in his hand. The sword light flashed. Then, there was a loud bang and the ground shook. The 2 iron doors were cut into 4 halves. No hidden weapons flew out, and no poisonous gas spread. The big iron door fell to the ground and smashed into a cloud of dust, revealing a corner of the final secret room. Ning Chen kicked open the other half of the iron door that was blocking the way and walked in. Mingyu put down her hands that were covering her ears and jogged to follow him. In the secret room, one could see 4 even brighter luminous pearls embedded in the 4 corners. The entire secret room was as bright as day. On the bookshelves below, scrolls of scriptures were neatly arranged. Most of the original copies of many lost Buddhist scriptures could be found here. Every scroll was well preserved. Ning Chen and little Mingyu knew nothing about Buddhism. They couldn't tell what was so precious about these things. Therefore, they automatically ignored these Buddhist scriptures. After taking a few steps in, a stone platform appeared in front of them. On the stone platform, there was a wooden niche carved from moonlight wood. Their eyes lit up. This was good stuff. Ning Chen walked forward and carefully opened the lid of the wooden niche. A golden ancient book lay quietly inside. It wasn't a scripture, but the cultivation method of the indestructible body of Vajra. Beside the scripture, there was a golden short sword. On the hilt of the short sword, there was a jade bottle. 3 words were clearly written on the jade bottle: Heavenly Buddha Elixir. There were only 2 elixirs. There was no doubt that they were precious. In this world, any elixir with the word heaven in it was extraordinary. For example, the Xiantian elixir of the Great Xia, the divine heaven elixir of the eternal night cult, and the heaven-turning elixir that he had eaten before. There was no need to ask about these 3 items. He took them directly. As for the scripture, he carried it away as usual. Although he couldn't understand it, it didn't mean that it was worthless. The fact that Buddhism could exist for so long meant that it was extraordinary. These scriptures were the best evidence. After searching all the places that needed to be searched, Ning Chen pulled little Mingyu back to the surface. He left 20 to 30 people to carry the scriptures. After a night of torment, the sky was about to brighten. The soldiers in the front hall gradually woke up from their meditation. They quietly went down the mountain to bury their dead brothers. They were the imperial guards of the Great Xia. They were already prepared to die in battle. Being able to rest in peace after death was already the best outcome. Ning Chen watched quietly from the side. He didn't say anything. The soldiers of the Great Xia had always been the most admirable group of people in the world. If it weren't for generations of soldiers of the Great Xia who had firm beliefs, the Great Xia wouldn't have existed for 1,000 years. Little Mingyu had already fallen asleep on his back. Under the light of the morning sun, it was indeed tiring. However, none of the soldiers had rested yet. He had to accompany them here. He was their Marquis. It was already a breach of duty that he couldn't bring them back alive. At the very least, he had to accompany them on the last journey of their lives. More and more soldiers gathered at the foot of the mountain. By the time the sun rose high in the sky, everyone had already gathered at the foot of the mountain. Farewell. Looking at the dozens of soldiers lying neatly in front of him, Ning Chen sent them off in a deep voice. Soon after, he sprinkled the first handful of soil. Out of 1,000 soldiers, 700 had died in battle. This was only the first battle. Not long after, even he and the remaining 300 soldiers behind him might not be able to survive. Today, they were burying their dead. In the future, they hoped that someone would also sprinkle the soil for them. The young and mature faces in front of them were gradually buried in the soil. Everyone's heart sank along with it. For the sake of 1,000 years of peace in the Great Xia, they had no regrets. Even if all of them died in battle, they would block the path of Buddha in the mortal world in front of Mount Mijie. After burying their dead comrades, the remaining 300 soldiers returned to the mountain. They didn't know when the experts from the Buddha kingdom would return. They had to be prepared as much as possible. All the scriptures in the secret chamber had been moved out. There were more than 7,000 of them. Ning Chen ordered 10 soldiers to escort these scriptures back to the Great Xia and hand them over to Zhang Sun. He believed that these scriptures would definitely be useful. They couldn't be left here. For this reason, the only rank 8 expert in the Imperial Guards also followed along to ensure that nothing would go wrong. In this world, rank 8 experts were rare. After all, not every place was like the Buddha Kingdom, where rank 9 experts were as worthless as cabbages. The remaining people continued to rest and recuperate. Ning Chen distributed the rest of the Buddhist elixirs, except for the 2 heavenly Buddha elixirs, to help everyone recover as soon as possible. It was a pity that there were no peak rank 9 experts among them. Otherwise, with the help of the 2 heavenly Buddha elixirs, there might be another Xiantian expert. In the Great Xia, no one practiced Buddhism. The actual effect of these 2 heavenly Buddha elixirs was definitely not as good as the Xiantian elixirs in the Xia Palace. However, they were not comparable to ordinary elixirs. In the remaining days, Ning Chen carefully studied the indestructible body of Vajra technique he found in the underground secret chamber. The old bald donkey was too strong. He had to find the flaw of this technique as soon as possible. In this world, there was no invincible technique. Even the tomes of arcane had their own limitations, let alone other techniques. From the first time he met a Buddhist disciple who practiced the indestructible body of Vajra to the battle last night, he didn't find a good solution. He could only rely on his foundation to fight. This definitely wouldn't work when he met the abbot of Du Yi Temple. One day later, in the ancient Orchid City, the news of Mount Mijie being breached finally arrived. The Buddha in the mortal world who was still cultivating immediately opened his eyes. A strong murderous intent flashed in his merciful eyes. One of you stay here and wait for the water to recede before continuing north. The other 3 follow me back. The abbot of Du Yi Temple glanced at the 4 people in front of him and said in a deep voice, "Yes." The 4 Buddhist protectors bowed and accepted the order. Chapter 121. The Buddha in the ancient Orchid City had taken action. Pulling one hair would affect the whole body. Beside the Nanli River, Qing Ning had also woken up from her healing. She got up and left. At the same time, in the northern Meng army, Fan Lingyue also had a report about the fall of Mount Mijie. The atmosphere in the tent became heavy. "Advisor, will Her Majesty be in danger?" Qing Wuyo asked worriedly. "No." Fan Lingyue shook his head. Not only would Mingyu not be in danger, but she would also benefit from the disaster and be sent back. Now, everyone knew that Mingyu was in Ning Chen's hands, and so was the abbot of Du Yi Temple. In the current situation, Northern Meng, the Eternal Night Cult, and the Buddhist kingdom all hoped that the other party could contribute more and share the pressure of the battlefield. Whether Mingyu returned to Northern Meng would undoubtedly have a huge impact on Northern Meng. The abbot of Du Yi Temple knew this better than anyone else. He would only try his best to save and send Mingyu back, and not use the opportunity to threaten her. Among them, none of them had the strength to fight against Great Xia. At this time, no one would be foolish enough to destroy their alliance. In this world, there weren't many smart people, but there weren't many fools either. If the abbot of Du Yi Temple still couldn't understand such a simple logic, his title of Buddha would be in vain. Mount Mijie, in front of the broken Buddha, Ning Chen had been sitting for an entire day, looking at the 3 things he took out from the secret chamber: a scroll of martial arts, a bottle of Buddha heaven pills, and a golden short sword. "Men," Ning Chen said. "Present." An imperial army soldier stepped forward and bowed respectfully. "Bring the 4 monks here." "Yes." The imperial army soldier received the order and quickly walked toward the main hall. Not long after, 4 soldiers escorted the 4 monks to the front of the Buddha and stood at the side, waiting for the next order. Ning Chen stood up and didn't say anything. He formed a sword with his right hand and pointed it at one of the monks. The Buddha's Vajra acupoint was broken, and he let out a painful groan as blood flowed from his mouth. Seeing this, the 4 imperial army soldiers were shocked speechless. Although their martial arts were destroyed, their physical strength was still as strong as before. How could they be injured so easily? As expected. Ning Chen's eyes narrowed slightly. The indestructible body of Vajra technique recorded how to cultivate all 360 acupoints in the body, but it didn't mention the Tan Zhong acupoint in the middle of the chest. There was no perfect cultivation method in the world. No matter how strong the unbreakable golden body was, there were still places where it could not be cultivated. The Tanzhong acupoint was the biggest flaw. No wonder all the monks of the Buddhist kingdom he had seen always had one hand on their chest. So this was the reason. However, apart from this matter, there was another thing that he was very concerned about. It was the golden short sword that he had taken out from the secret chamber. Since the abbot of Du Yi Temple placed it in such an important place, there must be something unusual about it. Furthermore, he could clearly sense an indescribable power within the sword, but it was being forcefully suppressed by another power. Without a doubt, this suppressive power was the authentic Buddhist power of Buddhism. It was very powerful, and it was at least at the innate level. What is this? Ning Chen held the golden short sword and walked in front of another Buddhist Vajra. Amitba. The Buddhist Vajra clasped his hands together and chanted, unwilling to reveal anything. You don't want to say it, right? Ning Chen sneered. He liked to be stubborn. Men, break open his Tan Zhong acupoint and then dig a hole to bury him. Remember, don't bury him past his chest. Yes, sir. An imperial guard stepped forward and took him away. What about you? Ning Chen walked in front of the next Buddhist Vajra and asked calmly. This is a Buddhist holy weapon. The Buddhist Vajra didn't keep being stubborn and replied. What is it for? Ning Chen continued asking. It's just a keepsake. It doesn't have any special use. The Buddhist Vajra replied. Do you think I'm stupid? Ning Chen glanced indifferently at the monk in front of him and suddenly said. The Buddhist Vajra was stunned and didn't react for a moment. Take him away like the previous one. Ning Chen ordered. Yes. Another soldier walked over and took him away. Ning Chen walked in front of the last Buddhist Vajra and said coldly, you're the only one left. My patience is limited. I'll only give you one chance. It's the same question as before. This sword is called the Blood Vein Sword. It wasn't originally a Buddhist weapon, but a demonic weapon. When Buddhism was first established, it was obtained by the first abbot of this temple. He used Buddhist Dharma to suppress Du Yi Temple for 300 years. In the end, the demonic nature was sealed and it became a holy weapon of Buddhism. As soon as he finished speaking, the last Buddhist Vajra sighed deeply and silently chanted a Buddhist proclamation. That's all? Ning Chen asked. That's all. The Buddhist Vajra nodded. Can this seal be broken? Ning Chen asked casually. No. A trace of undetectable panic flashed in the Buddhist Vajra's eyes as he denied. Take him away. Ning Chen said coldly. Yes. The soldiers at the side walked forward and carried the last Buddhist Vajra away. After obtaining this little information, Ning Chen thought for a moment and said, Men. Yes. An Imperial Guard soldier ran over and said respectfully. Take people to the main hall and the back hall to continue searching, especially that secret room. See if you can find anything suspicious. Ning Chen ordered in a deep voice. Yes. The soldier cupped his fists and bowed before leaving. After saying that, Ning Chen carried the golden short sword and went to the place where the 3 monks were buried and waited quietly. The mountain was made of stone, so it wasn't easy to find a place with soil. However, building a temple required soil. There were so many temples on the mountain, so how could there not be soil? The 3 of them were buried about 100 feet away from the Buddha. The Tanzhong acupoint in the middle of their chests had been broken. Under the pressure of the ground, blood was constantly spurting out. The wound is too big. Be careful next time. Ning Chen glanced at the 3 soldiers and said. Yes. The 3 of them replied. Ning Chen walked forward and looked at the 3 monks. He calmly said, How is it? Do you feel okay? A person's body only has about 4,000 milliliters of blood. If you lose more than a third of it, you'll fall into a coma. If you lose more than half of it, you'll die. Of course, you won't understand. Let me put it this way. In a moment, you'll feel empty all over, and you'll be hallucinating and hallucinating. At that time, you won't be far from death. Ba. The 3 of them chanted and closed their eyes. Good. Ning Chen smiled coldly. He wasn't worried at all. Death wasn't scary. What was scary was the process of waiting for death. As long as the 3 of them weren't real Buddhas, he didn't believe that they wouldn't be shaken. Ho, is this useful? One of the soldiers asked in a low voice. You'll know later. Ning Chen calmly replied. A person's greatest fear was the unknown. Moreover, this fear would be infinitely magnified in the process of waiting for death. Before long, the 3 of them could clearly feel their lives flowing out of their bodies bit by bit. The fear of death brought about by the feeling of emptiness wasn't something that everyone could endure. At that time, it would be the time to test their Buddha's heart. A quarter of an hour later, the ground in front of the 3 Buddhist Vajras was completely dyed red with blood. The 3 of them began to pale and the color gradually faded. Ning Chen casually inserted the golden dagger in front of the 3 of them and waited patiently on the side. He didn't believe that these 3 monks were really not afraid of death. If it were other people, he might believe it, but it was absolutely impossible for these bald donkeys. The reason was very simple. They didn't have any faith. The monks of Mijia Mountain knew better than anyone whether their Buddha really existed or not. Even the miracles of Buddhism had been artificially created by them. How could these people, whose faith was fake, truly not be afraid of death? Half an hour later, the 3 of them began to tremble. Their lips were pale, and tiny beads of sweat had appeared on their foreheads. Moreover, the beads of sweat were still increasing. It's about time. Ning Chen narrowed his eyes slightly. The true test was about to begin. 3/4 of an hour later, the 3 of them were still holding on. However, their tightly shut eyes had already begun to reveal a trace of fear on their faces. At this moment, the soldier who had gone to search the secret room returned. Just as he was about to speak, Ning Chen gave him a look to stop him. How did the search go? Did you find anything? Asked Ning Chen. The soldier understood and changed his tone. Reporting to the Marquis, we found some clues. Our brothers would like to invite the Marquis over to take a look. All right, I'll go over right now. These 3 people are useless. If they don't want to talk, then forget it. Once the blood dries up, just bury them, ordered Ning Chen coldly. Yes. The 3 soldiers standing to the side respectfully accepted the order. After he finished instructing them, Ning Chen pulled up the golden short sword that was covered in blood and mud from the ground before turning around and leaving. This monk will speak. At this moment, one of them was finally unable to endure the torture of the fear of death. He opened his eyes and spoke while trembling. Oh. Looks like there are still people who understand the situation. Ning Chen stopped moving, and a wisp of a cold smile appeared on the corners of his mouth. Save him and bury the other 2. Yes, sir, replied the 3 soldiers. This monk will speak as well. At this moment, another person opened his eyes and spoke with fear. All of you. The remaining person revealed an expression of rage and was about to curse loudly. However, he was forever unable to utter these curses. Ning Chen's figure flashed and instantly arrived before him. After that, he stomped his foot into the ground with his head and body. Bury him. Bring the other 2 over, said Ning Chen with an icy cold expression. After he finished speaking, he turned around and walked towards the back of the hall. The two Buddhist Vajras were dug out. After a short moment, they were escorted to the back of the hall in a daze. Speak. What exactly is the origin of this short sword and how to undo the seal? Ning Chen glanced at the two of them and spoke. A wisp of guilt flashed through the face of one of the Buddhist Vajras, and he said in a low voice, "The origin of the sword is recorded on a stone tablet under the secret room. The method to undo the seal is also on it." "Where is the exact location of the stone tablet?" asked Ning Chen. "This monk can take the Marquis to find it," said the other Buddhist Vajras hastily. "Lead the way," said Ning Chen indifferently. The two of them didn't dare resist and obediently walked towards the secret room. Chapter 122. Ning Chen followed the two Vajras into the secret room. The Imperial Army soldiers were all shocked. They hadn't found anything yet, so why was the Marquis here? "Marquis," the soldiers bowed respectfully. You can all step aside," said Ning Chen with a wave of his hand. "Yes, sir." The soldiers stood up and made way for the secret chamber. "Where is the stone slab?" "Speak," said Ning Chen calmly as he glanced at the two. The two Vajras walked to the stone platform where the wooden shrine had been placed and said, "It's right below here." Ning Chen stepped forward and pushed the stone platform, but it still didn't budge. He couldn't help but frown. "Is there a mechanism?" "No." The two shook their heads. Ning Chen nodded. "They wanted to smash it again, right?" Very good, this was what he was best at. With a clang, the ink sword was unsheathed. With a loud bang, the stone platform shattered and scattered across the ground. After the stone platform shattered, Ning Chen dug down another half a foot. Sure enough, a broken stone slab appeared. The pictures and words carved on it were somewhat blurred. It was obvious that it had been there for a long time. Ning Chen stared at the stone slab for a long time, his frown growing deeper and deeper. The nearby Imperial Army commander saw this and walked over. When he saw the contents of the stone slab, his expression changed. "Marquis," said the Imperial Army commander with a worried expression. "No need to say more." "I know what I'm doing," said Ning Chen with a wave of his hand. The stone slab clearly stated the origin of this golden dagger. This was indeed not an item of Buddhism, but a heavy weapon with a demonic nature. A long time ago, the owner of this dagger had great enmity with Buddhism. He had once used this dagger to kill countless Buddhist disciples and followers, staining it with the blood of countless Buddhas. In the end, the first abbot of Du-Yi Temple couldn't take it anymore. He mobilized the strength of the entire Buddhist kingdom and fought a bloody battle for 2 days before finally killing the owner of the sword. In the end, he suppressed the sword under the temple for 300 years, using the great Buddhist Dharma to seal the resentment within the sword. This sword was filled with the hatred of the owner of the sword towards Buddhism, as well as the resentment of the 100,000 Buddhist disciples and followers. It could be said to be an extremely demonic weapon of resentment. When Buddhists talked about the afterlife, they were most afraid of resentment. This period of history had always been a taboo of Buddhism. It was buried deep in the dark underground, never to see the light of day. After being sealed by the great Buddhist Dharma, the resentful weapon had lost its original appearance and turned into a golden Buddhist holy weapon. However, it did not mean that the resentment inside had disappeared. The method to remove the seal was not written clearly, and the Buddhists were not stupid. They definitely did not want this demonic artifact to appear again. However, the first half of the stone slab had already explained that this was a resentful weapon forged from the blood of Buddhist disciples and followers. Now that it had become a Buddhist holy weapon, it was only sealed because of this. In other words, as long as the power of resentment was stronger than the power of Buddhism, the sword would be unsealed again. Since the Dharma could suppress the power of resentment, the power of resentment could also suppress the Dharma. The Buddha and the devil restrained each other, and vice versa. Soon, they would have to deal with an innate Buddha in the three disasters state. Any bit of suppression would be of great use. Ho, there are Buddhist disciples continuously gathering at the foot of the mountain. They're about to rush up the mountain. At this moment, a soldier hastily rushed over and reported. The Imperial Army captain grimaced and hastily said, "Marquis, say no more." Ning Chen raised his hand to stop him. Then he looked at the surrounding soldiers and coldly said, "Everyone, come with me." Yes. The soldiers respectfully accepted the order. The Buddha of the Buddhist kingdom should have already received the news. On the way back, he could not hesitate at all. At the foot of the mountain, Buddhist disciples continuously rushed over from all directions. Just in front of him, there were already tens of thousands of them. Ning Chen led the 300 imperial army soldiers down the mountain. Seeing more and more figures gathering at the foot of the mountain, the coldness in his eyes grew thicker and thicker. The number of Buddhist disciples from afar was still increasing. The 300 imperial army soldiers stood behind Ning Chen without saying a word, quietly waiting for orders. "You demons, get out of Buddha Mountain." Among the bustling crowd, a Buddhist disciple relied on his numbers to roar. "Get out of Buddha Mountain." The other Buddhist disciples also angrily cursed. The voices of tens of thousands of people were like angry thunder on a sunny day in the gradually darkening night sky. It was deafening and resounded for 50 kilometers. Ning Chen coldly looked at the crazy Buddhist disciples in front of him. He was not angry or pitiful. He was just as calm as before. Stupid people who had lost their minds did not deserve any pity. Compared to the soldiers of Great Xia who were still fighting a bloody battle, they were worthless. The voices of the crowd went from loud to weak. Seeing that the demons in front of them were still indifferent, the deafening voices gradually weakened. At this moment, Ning Chen opened his mouth and said in a mocking tone, "In the eyes of your Buddha, you are a bunch of idiots. Of course, in my eyes, you are even worse than idiots." Hearing these words, the crowd immediately exploded. Their anger was instantly stimulated to the extreme and they swarmed up the mountain. Suddenly, Ning Chen's body moved. The golden short sword in his hand drew a terrifying sword ray. Immediately, severed limbs flew all over the sky and blood spurted out like rain. "Kill, leave no one alive," Ning Chen said coldly. "Yes." The 300 imperial army soldiers received the order. In the blink of an eye, they killed their way into the crowd. In an instant, under the sacred ground, fearful voices rose and fell one after another. However, they could not stop the merciless sword rays from taking their lives. The difference between ordinary people and martial artists who had no organization or discipline was unimaginable. In front of Mijia Mountain, there was only slaughter, a naked slaughter. Fresh blood flowed out. Gullies were formed in the ground by the blood, spreading out horizontally and vertically until they reached 5 kilometers away. Ning Chen stood on the stone steps in front of the mountain and took out his golden short sword. With a flip of his palm, the blood below constantly flew up. Soon after, it turned into a bloody waterfall that rushed toward the golden short sword in the air. The golden short sword floating in the air shone brightly and continuously resisted the erosion of the bloody waterfall. The slaughter continued. Similarly, blood continued to flow. The atmosphere of anger, fear, hatred, and despair continued to spread. Amidst the blood, an intense resentment exploded. The Buddhist light in the sword became brighter and brighter, and the resentment in the bloody waterfall became denser and denser. When the two collided, ear-piercing sounds constantly rang out. This was the most tragic night in the Buddhist kingdom. Buddhists could not do anything. They could only watch helplessly as the Buddhists at the foot of the mountain were slaughtered by the demons of Great Xia. The soldiers of Great Xia had the strictest discipline in the world. The belief of absolute obedience had long been deeply ingrained in their hearts. From the moment they received their orders, there was no doubt or hesitation. The bloody waterfall in the air became more and more majestic. The Buddhist light in it was gradually drowned out by the bloody waterfall, and it was difficult for it to shine. 300 kilometers away, the expressions of the abbot of Du-E Temple and the three protectors of the Buddhist kingdom changed. They were shocked by the powerful resentment in the distance. At the same time, even further away, a look of deep worry flashed across Qing Ning's face. Her figure flashed past and hurried in the direction of Mijia Mountain. At the foot of the sacred mountain, the miserable cries became softer and softer. There were only a few figures left standing. The golden short sword in the bloody waterfall began to vibrate. It was obviously at the critical moment of breaking the seal. Boom! In the next moment, the surface of the golden short sword erupted with a final brilliance and immediately shattered. At the same time, the resentment on the sword suddenly soared into the sky, rolling up the surrounding bloody waterfall and forming a huge blood pillar that penetrated the heavens and the earth. The resentment soldiers appeared and the rain of blood fell. It was as if the heavens were crying tears of blood for the calamity of the mortal world. In the rain of blood, the resentment soldiers gradually appeared. The appearance of the sword greatly changed. A 3-foot-long sword appeared. Bloody lines spread out and a demonic aura circulated, causing people to feel cold all over. At the foot of Mijia Mountain, the 300 soldiers bathed in the rain of blood. There was no one left standing around them. They knew that from now on, they would be the most sinful people in the world. Ning Qin did not say anything, nor did he apologize. He stood in the rain of blood, quietly waiting for the future Buddha. An hour later, 4 powerful figures slowly walked over. With every step they took, the earth would tremble. These were the 4 most powerful Buddhas of Buddhism. Bang 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 bang. The 4 gradually approached, and the corpses blocking their way were all sent flying. Their Buddhist robes were not stained with blood and were incomparably holy. You guys block the 3 of them. Ning Qin held the blood-patterned sword and glanced at the Imperial Guard leader. Yes. The Imperial Guard respectfully accepted the order. This was the final battle. No one knew how it would end, but they had no other choice. The 3 Buddhist country guardians were the most powerful people in the world aside from the innate stage. Just by standing there, they gave off a terrifying and unshakable pressure. In comparison, the abbot of Du-E Temple seemed more ordinary. He was calm and reserved, without the aura of a martial artist. However, everyone present knew that this was just an illusion. The Buddha of the mortal world had proven his strength countless times. Ning Qin stood in front of the Buddha of the mortal world without any hesitation. Heretical demons, heinous sins, Buddha cannot tolerate them. Amitabha. The abbot of Du-E Temple put his palms together and chanted the name of the Buddha. Immediately, his body shone with golden light as he started the battle of killing demons. There is no Buddha in this world. There is only a group of hypocritical bald donkeys like you. My sins will be punished by the heavens. It will not be the turn of bald donkeys like you. As soon as he finished speaking, the resentment soldier in Ning Chen's hand shone with a bloody light. Within 10 miles, everything was dyed red, covering the clouds and the moon. It was terrifying. At this moment, the 3 Buddhist country guardians only felt their inner breath stagnate. Their Buddhist power was blocked and they could not use it. Heaven's will. The abbot of Du-E Temple sighed softly. He took half a step forward, no longer hiding the murderous intent in his eyes. At this moment, a beautiful green figure rushed over from afar and landed between the 2 of them. Sorry, I'm late, Qing Ning said apologetically. You're not late. It's enough to send him to heaven, Ning Qin said coldly without changing his expression. You're just a junior. The abbot of Du-E Temple took a step forward and turned into an angry Vajra. Clang! The silver light of the spear swept past. Qing Ning took a few steps back with a strange expression. The abbot of Du-E Temple was slow. The power of his moves was also much weaker. Although it was still powerful, it was not as overwhelming as before. Ning Qin increased his power by 30% and said telepathically, "Don't think too much." This blood-veined sword was once owned by a top Khanate realm master. It gathered countless resentment and has a restraining effect on the Buddhist power of these bald donkeys. However, I can't hold on for too long. I have to end this quickly. Also, the weakness of the indestructible Vajra body is in the middle of the chest. Understood. Qing Ning replied with a serious expression. Chapter 123. At the foot of Mijia Mountain, the bloody light was getting stronger and stronger. The abbot of Du Yi Temple frowned as he felt the Buddhist power being suppressed in his body. The murderous intent in his eyes was getting stronger. This man must not be left alive. On the opposite side, Ning Chen's expression also became unprecedentedly serious. This was the strongest enemy he had ever met in his life. Even with the suppression of resentment, he was still the abbot of Du Yi Temple, a living Buddha. Their only chance was to compete in speed. The abbot of Du Yi Temple was not good at speed. Now that he had slowed down again, he could barely keep up. In other words, Qing Ning's speed was already superior to his. In this battle, the existence of the blood-veined sword was crucial. He had to activate the resentment in the sword as much as possible to suppress the old monk's Buddhist power and create a chance for Qing Ning to fight. The abbot of Du Yi Temple obviously knew where the key was. Looking at the resentful soldiers in front of him, he slowly raised his right hand and approached Ning Chen. Golden light shone and bloomed in the bloody light. Ear-piercing sounds were constantly heard. It was the violent collision of the Buddhist resentment. At this moment, Qing Ning moved. Green light streaked across the sky and instantly arrived in front of him. The silver spear condensed light and pierced towards the abbot's sandalwood. Clang! The abbot of Du Yi Temple blocked with his left palm. The silver spear was blocked and could not move forward. At the same time, Ning Chen also arrived in front of him. The bloody sword broke through the air and slashed towards the Buddha's eyes. The sound of metal clashing was heard. The abbot of Du Yi Temple closed his eyes and formed a Buddhist seal with his right hand. The swastika appeared and slapped towards Ning Chen. Bang! The silver spear was blocked. In a short moment, Ning Chen had already retreated 10 feet. The bow of destruction appeared. In the falling snowflakes, a silver arrow was shot out. Qing Ning cooperated with him. The silver spear turned around and broke through the sandalwood from the other side. In the face of the two attacks, the abbot of Du Yi Temple's expression did not change. He put his palms together and a golden light shone. The inviolable Buddhist power was unparalleled. The arrow shattered and the silver spear was also blocked an inch away from the sandalwood. Green swallow circle. The silver spear was blocked. Qing Ning's hand holding the spear loosened. The spear body spun rapidly. Green light gathered and an ear-piercing sound was heard. In the next moment, Qing Ning's palm hit the end of the spear. The silver spear that was blocked broke through the Buddhist light and moved an inch. At that moment, Buddha grasped the spear's blade and blocked the silver spear's advance. At the same time, the swastika appeared again. The abbot of the Du Yi Temple flipped his palm towards Qing Ning. In that instant, the two palms separated, giving Ning Chen the best opportunity. He took a step forward and thrust his sword forward, instantly arriving in the middle of the sandalwood. Is it that simple? The abbot of Du Yi Temple snorted coldly. His palm force instantly changed direction and pressed towards Ning Chen. Bang! Ning Chen blocked the attack with his sword. The bloody light shone brightly, but the Buddha's palm's power was shocking. Most of the Buddha's power was consumed by resentment. However, the remaining power was still not something a mere 9th rank could withstand. Ning Chen was sent flying, covered in blood. Qing Ning's expression changed, but she didn't have time to care about the Buddha's injury. She turned her right hand and separated the spear from the blade. Immediately, the bladeless spear pierced towards the Buddha's chest. The silver true qi entered his body. The abbot of Du-yi Temple grunted and struck the woman in front of him with his palm. Qing Ning flew back dozens of feet. After landing on the ground, she took a few more steps back before she managed to steady herself. Blood quietly flowed from the corner of her mouth. "How are you?" Qing Ning glanced at Ning Chen and asked. "I'm not dead yet." As he spoke, Ning Chen spat out another mouthful of blood. The blood splashed onto the blade of his sword, creating a stronger smell of blood. In a short moment of confrontation, both of them were already injured, especially Ning Chen. After taking a blow, his body could barely hold on. The Buddhas in the mortal world were too strong. Even if they were suppressed by the resentment around them, their strength was still absolutely strong. It was difficult to defeat them. On the other side of the battlefield, the leader of the Forbidden Army led more than 300 Forbidden Army soldiers to fight against the three Buddhas. With the help of the bloody light, they barely stopped the three from advancing. The 300 Forbidden Army soldiers were willing to risk their lives. Even if they were to die in battle, they wouldn't let the three bald donkeys disturb their Ho. They believed that Ho would definitely stop the fake Buddhas in the mortal world. There was no reason other than that he was their Ho. On the two sides of the battlefield, one side was more difficult than the other. The 1 month that Great Xia needed was now less than 10 days. Whether they could survive or not all depended on tonight's battle. They couldn't let their residents in Du-yi Temple return to Gulan City. Otherwise, the 4,000 Forbidden Army soldiers by the Nanli River wouldn't be able to escape the fate of dying in battle. The soldiers who were bathed in blood charged forward without any regrets. When one fell, another charged forward without hesitation. Finally, casualties began to appear among the three Buddhas. Under the sacrifice of 4 7th-rank soldiers, the leader of the Forbidden Army finally found a flaw in one of the Buddhas. He stabbed his sword into the Buddha's Tanjong acupoint. The other 2 Buddhas were furious. They turned their palms and attacked, but were blocked by the bodies of 2 soldiers. In an instant, their bodies exploded. Blood and body parts splattered everywhere. No one was sad, and no one cried. The remaining soldiers continued to fight without wavering. Their swords were merciless, but their hearts were even more merciless. This was the most miserable battle that the Great Xia Forbidden Army had ever lost. 300 people against 3 people. One by one, they died. Almost at every moment, there were soldiers falling. They had hope and smiles on their faces, entrusting their hopes to those who were still alive. Not long after, less than 100 of the 300 soldiers were still standing, and they were still falling. Ning Chen didn't get distracted, but he also felt the tragic battle not far away. Since he couldn't bring them back, he would drag this group of fake Buddhas down with him. The abbot of Du-yi Temple suppressed the vibrating silver vital energy in his body. His face turned pale for a moment. Qing Ning turned the end of the spear and pulled out another spear blade. She immediately put it on. The 3 of them faced each other. After a while, Ning Chen moved first. He clenched his left hand, and the ink sword flew out. Frost condensed, and he attacked again. Clang! It was still an inch in front of the Buddha's palm. The Buddha's palm blocked the sword. After suffering a loss just now, the abbot of Du-yi Temple was even more cautious about protecting the Buddha's Tanjong acupoint. The ink sword was blocked, and Ning Chen's blood-veined sword moved again. With a bang, it slashed on the Buddha's eye. Suddenly, the blood-red light was dazzling. The Buddha's resentment chi collided violently, and an ear-piercing sound was heard again. The abbot of Du-yi Temple still had his eyes closed. His left palm protected the Buddha's Tanjong acupoint, and his right palm formed a Buddha's seal. In an instant, the sky was filled with golden light. The statue of the world-honored one appeared again. Danger was approaching. Qing Ning's face changed slightly. She rose into the air, and her vital energy was at its peak. She held the silver spear in her hand and pierced it into the statue's body. In a loud bang, the world-honored one was scattered. Qing Ning was also injured by the remaining power. She flew out again, covered in blood, and vomited vermilion red. Sister Qing Ning. Ning Chen's heart trembled. He activated the 2 heavenly books. Suddenly, frost and dark yellow light appeared in the blood-red sky. The 3 colors competed, and it was extremely dazzling in the night. The abbot of Du Yi Temple was not used to the sudden change in gravity. The speed of his counterattack was slightly slower, and there was a very short stagnation when he turned his left palm over. In a flash, the Buddha's Tanzhong's position appeared. The ink sword in Ning Chen's hand was already there. The sword sank in, and all of his vital energy was poured in. How dare you! The abbot of Du Yi Temple endured the pain and grabbed the ink sword with his left palm. Immediately, the Buddha's power around him suddenly spread. Crack! The ink sword broke. Ning Chen was pushed more than 200 feet away by the explosive Buddha's power. He spat out a mouthful of blood. The broken sword landed on the ground, and he was seriously injured again. The abbot of Du Yi Temple could not suppress his anger after being injured by the younger generation. His face was full of murderous intent. He stomped his foot, and the Buddha's seal appeared. Lotuses bloomed in the air, and the Buddha's lotus world was formed. The lotus world opened, and the surrounding blood-red light suddenly weakened. Instead, it seemed to be suppressed. Retreat! Ning Chen spat out another mouthful of blood and ordered reluctantly. Hearing this, the imperial guards reacted quickly. Without any hesitation, they immediately retreated up the mountain. The 2 Buddhist protectors wanted to chase after them, but a silver spear swept past them. They could not react in time and flew out with a bang, vomiting blood. On the other side, Ning Chen endured the injuries in his body. He shot 3 arrows in a triangular formation toward the old monk's eyes and the Buddha's Tanzhong's position. The Buddha's light around the abbot of Du Yi Temple shone. When the arrows approached, they shattered with a bang. Let's go, Ning Chen looked at Qing Ning and said again. You want to leave? Humph. The abbot of Du Yi Temple snorted coldly. He stomped his foot, and under the light of the lotus, he wanted to trap the blasphemer in front of him. Ning Chen slashed with the blood-veined sword in his hand. Endless blood qi gathered and blocked the light of the lotus. However, in the blink of an eye, the blood qi collapsed and could not block the sacred Buddha's power. At this time, Qing Ning was already in front of him. She grabbed him by the skin of his teeth, and then quickly retreated. The path up the mountain was very long. The 2 of them stayed behind and fought for 2 breaths. The remaining 70-odd imperial guards barely escaped 1,000 feet away. After all, not everyone was an inborn expert like Qing Ning. Moreover, they were injured and could not escape. Just as the abbot of Du Yi Temple and the 2 Buddhist protectors were chasing after them, an arrow flashed across the mountain path. The arrow pierced the ground, and a terrifying explosion was heard. The explosion without warning caused the mountain to shake violently. Gravel flew everywhere, and everyone staggered. In the blink of an eye, the light of the golden lotus shattered and was swallowed by the fire. Seeing this, Ning Chen did not hesitate. He turned into a ray of light and rushed into the fire. The blood-veined sword pierced through the air. At this moment, its speed reached an extreme. Ning Chen. Qing Ning's expression changed. She immediately chased after him and protected herself with her silver spear. However, it was still too late. In the fire, the Buddha in the mortal world stood quietly. He held the spear with one hand, and the other hand silently pierced through the blasphemer's figure. Blood splattered and dyed his Buddhist robe red. The cold wind blew the ends of his robe in the night. This bloody battle finally came to an end at this moment. The soldiers behind him stopped in their tracks. They were stunned and gradually became desperate. The Buddha in the fire had his Buddhist robe destroyed. The 2 Buddhist protectors were seriously injured and could not get up. However, the Buddha in the mortal world was still standing. This was a huge mountain that they could not cross in the end. Just when everyone thought that the battle was over, some light yellow fine sand appeared silently. It immediately condensed into a long sword and instantly pierced into the sandalwood of the Buddha in the mortal world. Chapter 124. The sudden change shocked everyone. Even the abbot of Du-Yi Temple did not expect the sand sword to penetrate his body with the full power of a legendary figure of Xia. Qing Ning was the first to react. She turned the silver spear in her hand and pierced it into the Buddha's sandalwood. She then turned her hand and the silver spear penetrated the Buddha's body. Innate true qi exploded and poured into the Buddha's body. The abbot of Du-Yi Temple groaned and retreated. The corner of his mouth was stained with blood. The Buddha's palm moved and was about to counterattack. However, a pair of blood-stained hands suddenly grabbed it. Frost condensed and it was quickly frozen. The moment of stagnation finally gave Qing Ning a chance to strike. She turned her hand and grabbed the blood-veined sword in Ning Chen's hand. She activated her true qi and pierced the Buddha's sandalwood point. Both of their bodies were nailed to the mountain wall with a clang. When the resentful weapon entered the Buddha's body, it exploded with intense hatred. The abbot of Du-Yi Temple vomited another mouthful of blood. The Buddha's power in his body was scattered by the resentful weapon. He could not move his body for a while. At this moment, Ning Chen could not hold on any longer and quickly collapsed. Ning Chen. Qing Ning held him up and poured her innate true qi into him. She tried her best to protect his last breath. At the same sandalwood point, Ning Chen's chest was penetrated by the Buddha's palm. Blood flowed and dyed his body red. At the last moment, the Buddha's palm pierced through his heart. Although Ning Chen managed to avoid the attack, he still suffered a terrible injury. Is he dead? Ning Chen opened his eyes and coughed up blood. No, there is no way to kill him at the moment. Qing Ning replied while pouring her true qi into him. Although the sandalwood point was the weakness of the indestructible body, it was not a fatal point. She was already helpless if he did not die from the injury. Burn him with fire. Ning Chen coughed violently. He resisted the drowsiness and said intermittently, leave a few people here, burn him day and night. Sprinkle the resentful blood of the Buddhists in the fire, don't give him a chance to recover. No matter how strong the indestructible body was, it had a limit. As long as the resentful fire was not extinguished, he would be burned to death sooner or later. Not far away, after the leader of the Imperial Guards heard the method, he immediately summoned the surviving soldiers to the foot of the mountain to find firewood and burn this fake Buddha to death. The last thing was not done yet. Ning Chen forced himself to hold on to his last bit of energy, unwilling to pass out. He said weakly, Mingyue is still waiting on the mountain. Send me up the mountain. Qing Ning didn't say anything. She turned into a streak of light and rushed up the mountain. In the abbot's room of the Du-Yi Temple, little Mingyu was sitting on the bed. She had long been awakened by the commotion at the foot of the mountain. However, with Ning Chen's instructions, she could not go out. With a bang, the door opened. Qing Ning brought Ning Chen in and walked to the bed. Seeing the bad guy's miserable appearance, the tears on little Mingyu's face immediately fell. She panicked and said, "What's wrong with you? Don't scare me." "Sister Qing Ning, go out for a moment," Ning Chen said in an extremely tired tone. Qing Ning hesitated for a moment before walking out. "Don't cry first, listen to me." Ning Chen's strength was getting weaker and weaker. He said with difficulty, "I might not be able to take care of you for the next few days. However, your body has my vital energy. As long as no one checks your pulse, you will be fine. Sister Qing Ning will definitely bring us back to the palace. You have to be careful and don't expose your identity." "Okay, I'll remember it." Mingyu nodded while crying. The corners of Ning Chen's mouth curved slightly, revealing a touch of relief. In a daze, his eyes slowly closed weakly. "Don't worry, I'll be fine." The last sentence was already inaudible. His hands drooped down, motionless. With a bang, Qing Ning, who was outside the door, broke in and swept up the two of them. Immediately after, a green ray of light rushed towards Xia. Ancient Orchid City, the only protector of the Buddhist kingdom, was sitting quietly in the temple. At this moment, a green ray of light descended from the sky. Without any warning, a silver spear pierced through his body. Xiantian vital energy exploded, instantly destroying the Buddhist's vitality. After killing the protector of the Buddhist kingdom, Qing Ning did not stay and immediately left. In the commander's tent of the Northern Meng army, Fan Lingyue stood in the tent with her eyes closed, deep in thought. Beside her, Qing Wuyo stood quietly, not saying a word. After a long time, Fan Lingyue opened her eyes and said calmly, "Go and invite Miss Mu here." "Yes." Qing Wuyo respectfully accepted the order and walked away. Fan Lingyue's eyes narrowed slightly, a touch of seriousness flashing through the depths of her eyes. She seemed to have neglected the possibility of Ningchen winning. Although the abbot of Du Yi Temple was a Buddha in the human world, he was still a Buddha in the human world. As long as he was a human, there was a possibility of failure. She could not be careless. If the abbot of Du Yi Temple won, it would be a good thing for the Northern Meng. If he lost, she also had to ensure that nothing would go wrong. Now, the only thing that could be confirmed was that when facing a Buddha in the human world, regardless of victory or defeat, Ningchen would not be unscathed. Being seriously injured was the best result. After a while, Mu Qingxue came. As usual, her clothes were whiter than snow, and there was not a trace of human emotion on her beautiful face. The two of them exchanged a few words. Not long after, a white brilliance broke through the sky and disappeared in the blink of an eye. In the tent, Fan Lingyue coughed a few times, and a trace of blood slid down from the corner of her mouth. Ever since she was injured last time, she felt that her body was getting weaker and weaker. She did not have much time left. She had to push forward the process of defeating the Xia dynasty as soon as possible. "Come." Thinking of this, Fan Lingyue opened her mouth and said, "Yes." The general entered the tent to wait for orders. Inform the two marquises of the great Xia dynasty on the opposite side that Northern Meng can consider giving in on the negotiation. Tell them to ensure the safety of His Majesty. Also, spread the Northern Meng's sincerity in the negotiation, Fan Lingyue calmly instructed. "Yes." The general accepted the order and immediately left in quick steps. In the heavenly mandate palace of the great Xia dynasty, Zhang Sun read the letter sent by Ningchen, and her frown deepened. The situation of the Buddhist kingdom was briefly mentioned in the letter, and only said that she should not worry. But how could she not be worried? The battle report from Nanli River had already been sent, and it said that the abbot of Du Yi Temple had already returned to the Buddhist kingdom. This was what she was most worried about. She was not a martial artist, and could not fully understand how powerful a Xiantian expert in the Three Disasters realm was. But Prince Yen had once told her that such an expert was not someone who could be defeated by human strength. As long as it was not an expert of the same level, no matter how many soldiers there were, it would be impossible to kill him. "Come." Zhang Sun slammed the table and stood up. "Yes." An imperial guard hurriedly ran in, knelt on one knee, and said respectfully, "Are those people from the Confucian sect not ready yet? A Marquis of the Great Xia and 1,000 soldiers are risking their lives to fight in the Buddhist kingdom, but they are still there, delaying time and time again. Go and tell the 4 heads of the Confucian sect that within 2 days, they must send troops to me." Zhang Sun said angrily. "Yes." The imperial guard received the order and quickly retreated. Zhang Sun came to the front of the hall and looked towards the southwest of the great Xia dynasty. The worry in her eyes grew stronger, and she whispered softly, "You must hold on." In the hall, the letter was placed on the table, and the last few lines of sincere advice were written. Because Zhang Sun was worried, she did not carefully think about it. In this world, Fan Lingyue was the person who understood Ningchen the most. Conversely, Ning Chen was also the person who understood Fan Lingyue the most. Thus, in the letter, she repeatedly emphasized that she should not trust any of Fan Lingyue's intentions to negotiate peace. Qing Ning brought Ning Chen and little Mingyu to the shore of the Nanli River for a short day. Although the medicines in the Imperial Guard could not compare to those in the Imperial Palace, Ning Chen's injuries could not be delayed any longer. They had to be treated as soon as possible. She had already helped him suppress the Buddhist energy that was constantly surging through his body, but with her cultivation, she was unable to force it out. This matter could only be resolved by asking Prince Yen for help once they returned to the Imperial City. Right now, what she needed to do was help him stabilize his injuries. That palm strike from before had not only pierced through Ning Chen's chest, it had also shaken up his internal organs. If he was not treated soon, Ning Chen would not be able to hold on until they returned to the Imperial Palace. In the Imperial Guard, there were no pills on the level of the Celestial Reversal Pill. However, there had to be a trade-off. Her top priority was to stabilize Ning Chen's injuries. As long as he could hold on until they returned to the Imperial Palace, his life would be saved. In the tent, Mingyu stubbornly guarded the bedside, unwilling to leave even a single step. No one could persuade her otherwise. Qing Ning had no choice but to let little Mingyu guard the bed. Mingyu was no longer just a hostage here. It could be said that as long as Ning Chen was still alive, no one would dare to make things difficult for this child. Back then, even when Emperor Xia was so crazy, he could not make him yield at all. Under heavy murderous intent, he had stubbornly protected little Mingyu. After arriving here, Ning Chen, who was still unconscious, had a high fever again. Once a person's body was weak, all kinds of illnesses would attack. Little Mingyu guarded him for a day and a night without sleeping or resting. She continuously used a towel soaked in cold water to lower his temperature. Her small hands were somewhat white from being soaked in the cold water. As an emperor, she had never done such a thing before. Not far away, Qing Ning stood quietly. Every hour, she would inject vital energy into Ning Chen, trying her best to suppress the Buddhist power in his body. However, the abbot of the Du-Yi Temple was an expert in the 3 disasters state, while she had just passed the first of the 5 disasters. The difference in their realms was too great. Every time she injected vital energy, she felt that the Buddhist power was becoming increasingly difficult to control. The next morning, Ning Chen's fever finally showed signs of subsiding. His injuries did not seem to be on the verge of erupting for the time being. Qing Ning did not say anything and was about to leave with the other 2. However, at this moment, a beautiful figure dressed in snow-white clothes slowly appeared in the distance. In an instant, she stood in front of the 3 of them. Mu Qingxue. Qing Ning's expression changed slightly. It was actually her. The first time they met, she was severely injured and had just woken up. Mu Qingxue was severely injured and unconscious. They had met for a short period of time. She did not expect to meet them again today. They did not say anything and did not exchange any words. Mu Qingxue's figure moved in a flash. His sword was as fast as a flowing shadow and arrived in an instant. Whoosh! The snow-white sword carried a trace of blood. Qing Ning retreated 3 zhang away with the other 2. However, she still could not avoid the brilliance of the Chengying sword. Her left shoulder was dyed red. In the blink of an eye, a dark red flower of blood appeared. The sword energy entered her body. Qing Ning staggered and her face turned pale in an instant. In the battle with the Buddha, the vital energy in her body was severely depleted. Now that she was carrying the other 2, she was unable to avoid the sword in Mu Qingxue's hand. Take this kid away. I will cover you. At this critical moment, a tall and majestic figure appeared in the southeast. After a few steps, he stood between the 2. It was the barbarian king who had been guarding the barbarian palace all this time. Chapter 125. Qing Ning had never seen the barbarian king, but there were only a few Xiantian experts in the world. She could guess who he was. "Thank you, senior." Qing Ning cupped her fists and took the opportunity to leave with the other two. Mu Qingshue's eyes turned cold. With a light step, he disappeared. Boom! At the same time, the barbarian king also moved. With a punch, space trembled and dust filled the air. Even the ground was shaken, creating a huge ravine. Mu Qingxue was blocked by the aftermath. After retreating out of the range of the space trembling, he couldn't help but frown. This person was so powerful. The barbarian king stood in front of Mu Qingxue, trying his best to buy time for Qing Ning to leave. Although he didn't like that kid, he didn't want Ah Man to be sad again. Ah Man rarely begged him, but this time she had been begging him for several days. This was a war between the Great Xia, the Buddhist kingdom, and Northern Meng. Originally, he didn't want to participate. Moreover, he couldn't beat that bald donkey. However, he couldn't ignore Ah Man's feelings. Ah Man's mother died early. He and Ah Man depended on each other for more than 10 years. Ah Man's happiness was his greatest wish. He went to Mount Mijie. He thought he was late, but the result gave him a fright. The Buddha of the mortal world was actually defeated and nailed to the mountain wall. After asking, he understood what happened. This kid was really sinister. He relied on all kinds of despicable and shameless methods to defeat the abbot of Du Yi Temple. Moreover, he burned the Buddha of the mortal world as if he was an animal. When he went, the soldiers of the Great Xia were still sprinkling the blood of the Buddhists. Needless to say, this method must have been taught by this kid before he left. This kid was powerful, but he had too many evil tricks in his stomach. He couldn't understand why his precious daughter fell for such a sinister guy. Also, why were these girls so beautiful? The one who saved him was like this, and the one who killed him was also like this. The barbarian king couldn't figure it out, so he stopped thinking about it. Looking at the white-clothed girl in front of him, his heart was filled with fear. This girl was too fast. If he wasn't careful, he would suffer a great loss. In this world, to have such a fast cultivation technique, it must be the Xing scroll of the heavenly book. Young people nowadays were really scary. After a brief exchange of glances, the two of them clashed again. One was fast, the other was strong. The collision of speed and power caused the world to be miserable and the void to tremble violently. Mu Qingxue tried to chase after him a few times, but he was blocked by the barbarian king's terrifying power each time. In the distance, Qing Ning had already disappeared with Ning Chen and Ming Yu. The world was so big that it was almost impossible to find and catch up with a Xiantian expert. Mu Qingxue squinted his eyes. His figure flashed and he retreated from the battle. He was unwilling to fight a meaningless battle. The barbarian king didn't stop them anymore. After finishing his work, he glanced at the three people who had disappeared and turned around to leave. Now, he would finally be able to give Wild an explanation when he returned. Above the wilderness, a green light flashed by and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Qing Ning led the two of them towards the direction of the imperial city. However, she had to stop for a period of time every hour because she needed to channel Ning Chen's vital energy. The sky gradually darkened, and the three of them finally returned to the imperial city after walking for a day. Qing Ning didn't rush back to the palace. Instead, she brought Ning Chen and little Ming Yu to the Prince Yan's residence. When the three of them entered the residence, Prince Yan was already waiting in the hall. When he saw Ning Chen covered in blood, he didn't ask anything. He waved his hand and the sand sword flew out and returned to the sword rack. "Bring him here." Prince Yan turned around and walked towards the back hall. Hearing this, Qing Ning immediately followed with the two of them. "Put him down." After entering the room, Prince Yan said. Qing Ning put Ning Chen on the bed in front of her and retreated to the side with little Ming Yu. Prince Yan turned his palm and a green light flashed. His fingers condensed and a vast amount of vital energy flowed into Ning Chen's body. It enveloped the Buddhist power left by the abbot of Du-Yi Temple and quickly destroyed it. After a while, Prince Yen stopped and said calmly, "Okay, bring him back to the palace." "Thank you, Prince Yen." Qing Ning bowed respectfully. Then she carried Ning Chen and left with little Mingyu. Looking at the three of them leaving, Prince Yen nodded slightly. When the sand sword entered the imperial city, he already knew that the three of them had returned. This time, he did a good job. However, Ning Chen's killing would have a great impact on his cultivation in the future. This impact would be even more obvious when he faced the 3 disasters and 5 tribulations. In the Heavenly Mandate Palace, Zhang Sun looked at Ning Chen's miserable state covered in blood and felt a pain in her heart. She said in a low voice, "Let's go back to Weiyang Palace." "Your Highness." Qing Ning was shocked. Ning Chen's current status was no longer suitable to enter Weiyang Palace. This was unreasonable. Zhang Sun snorted coldly and said angrily, "He came out of Weiyang Palace. Why can't he return? I'm not dead yet. Let's see who dares to make trouble." Qing Ning didn't say anything else. She carried Ning Chen and followed Zhang Sun back to Weiyang Palace. Mingyu silently followed by the side, not saying a word from beginning to end. In Weiyang Palace, Ning Chen was brought to his old room. Mingyu and Qing Ning stayed by the bed. Zhang Sun went to the Hall of Offerings in the palace to get the medicine. Not long after, Zhang Sun came back with 3 jade bottles and handed them to Qing Ning. She didn't know much about medicine. However, these were the best elixirs in the palace besides the Xiantian elixir. Dragon Heaven Elixir. Qing Ning looked at one of the purple jade bottles. A strange look flashed across her beautiful eyes. This was the only elixir of heaven that Xia Kingdom had developed in the past 1,000 years. Its efficacy was even comparable to the elixirs of heaven that had been passed down since ancient times. The elixir was the same as the jade bottles. It was purple all over. Qing Ning gently put it into Ning Chen's mouth. Then, she ran her genuine qi and carefully dissolved the efficacy of the elixir. The elixirs of heaven in this world were not for ordinary people to take. The enormous efficacy of the elixir alone could make a person bloat to death. Ning Chen was in a coma now. His body was extremely weak. She had to be careful. The Dragon Heaven Elixir was the same as the Heaven Reversal Elixir. It had a good healing effect on internal injuries. The difference was that the efficacy of the Dragon Heaven Elixir was relatively mild. It was the best choice for Ning Chen now. The remaining 2 elixirs were not elixirs of heaven. However, they were extremely precious elixirs. Ning Chen could take them when his body was slightly better. Beside the bed, Mingyu took the amulet that the bad guy gave her from her neck and put it on for him. Then, she continued to watch over him silently. Seeing this, Zhang Sun narrowed her eyes. She put this amulet on Ning Chen when he was in trouble last time. She didn't expect it to be on the little emperor of Northern Meng. It seemed that Ning Chen cared a lot about this little guy. At this moment, the footsteps of a young eunuch were heard outside the door. After a while, a respectful voice was heard, "Your Highness, there is a report from Beichue City." "Got it," Zhang Sun replied. Then, she glanced at Ning Chen on the bed and turned to leave. There were too many things in Xia Kingdom. She couldn't stay here for long. First, she was the Empress of Xia Kingdom. Then, she was the Master of Weiyang Palace. In the Heavenly Mandate Palace, Zhang Sun held the report and frowned more and more. She didn't understand what the military counselor of Northern Meng was thinking. That night, at the southwest border of Xia Kingdom, the disciples of the Buddhist kingdom tied wide planks to their feet and stepped on the mud to try to go north again. The 4,000 imperial guards on the shore of the Nanli River resisted with all their might. With the help of the natural barrier, they barely stopped the Buddhists. After the battle, more than half of the 4,000 imperial guards were killed or injured. There were less than 1,500 left. Another day later, the news of the defeat of the abbot of Du-yi Temple finally came. The disciples of the Buddhist kingdom were suddenly in a panic and didn't know what to do. At this time, the four heads of the Confucian sect appeared with 3,000 strong cultivators. They broke into Gulan city with powerful force and tactical matrix. In a day, they captured the remaining 5,000 disciples of the Buddhist kingdom. There was no doubt about the strength of the Confucian sect. This was the millennium of Xia kingdom, and also the millennium of the Confucian sect. The four heads were all strong cultivators who were half a step into the innate realm. Together with the 300 strongest cultivators of the Confucian sect and the heaven-trapping matrix passed down by the headmaster, they could even fight against innate experts of the three disasters realm. However, when the four of them led the disciples to the southwest border, they unexpectedly received the news of the defeat of the abbot of Du-yi Temple. This shocked the four heads of the Confucian sect and made them speechless. The Buddhist kingdom was weakened. Under this situation, Gulan city was breached in just a day. There was no suspense. The defeat of the Buddhist kingdom came so quickly that everyone who thought that Xia kingdom was doomed was shocked again. The world once again saw the deep foundation of this dynasty that had been invincible for thousands of years. In the northern Meng army, Fan Lingyue didn't say anything about the defeat of the Buddhist kingdom. He continued to pass the false image of peace to Xia kingdom step by step. In the east, the Eternal Night cult was also showing signs of exhaustion. Under the counterattack of Marquis Kai-Xian and the Blackwater army, they were retreating. A month ago, Xia kingdom seemed to be facing the end of the world. Suddenly, the situation took a sharp turn and the war seemed to be coming to an end. The main problem of Xia kingdom suddenly changed from an external threat to an internal one. In the imperial city, the conflict between the two princes was so intense that it was difficult to mediate. A mutiny could happen at any time. The three dukes and Zhang were trying their best to prevent this day from coming. However, the two princes had already become powerful and it was difficult to suppress them. In the most important 11 camps of the imperial guards in the imperial city, the third prince controlled the divine wind, swift rain, and violet lightning camps. The 10th prince controlled the green sparrow and white tiger camps. Of the remaining 6 camps, the eldest prince and Zhang controlled 4. The remaining 2 camps were still observing. It could be said that after the death of Emperor Xia, most of the military strength in the imperial city had surrendered to the 3 princes. 330,000 of the most elite soldiers of Xia kingdom were quietly waiting for orders. The 5,000 generals that Ning Chen took away were all soldiers of the Dragon Guard camp under Zhang. They were the best of the best in the 13 camps of the imperial guards. Unfortunately, not many of these 5,000 soldiers returned alive. This was the most serious loss since the establishment of the Dragon Guard camp. In the 1,000 years since the establishment of Xia kingdom, this was the first time that they had no choice but to use the imperial guards of the Dragon Guard camp. Now, the external threat was finally temporarily alleviated under the bloody battle of the soldiers of Xia kingdom. However, the internal problems that Ning Chen had been worried about were also fully exposed. The matter of Xia kingdom appointing a new emperor could no longer be delayed. Chapter 126. In the northern Meng camp, in front of the commander's tent, Fan Lingyue looked in the direction of the imperial city of Great Xia. There, the purple fate was getting darker and darker, indicating that the situation of Great Xia did not turn for the better. Instead, it was getting worse. However, there were only a few people in the world who knew the art of aura viewing. Most people knew nothing about it. Military advisor. Qing Wuyo opened his mouth and wanted to ask, but he didn't know how to start. He really couldn't understand why the military advisor kept giving in during the negotiation. Could it be that they really wanted to make peace with Great Xia? Don't ask too much. Now is not the time. You will know why soon. Fan Lingyue didn't explain further. The situation of Great Xia had not reached its worst yet. She had to continue waiting. Now, the biggest hidden danger was that Ning Chen was not dead and had returned to the imperial palace of Great Xia. This was what she was most worried about. Many times, the impact of one person's existence on the overall situation was beyond the imagination of ordinary people. Who would have thought that the losing side in the War of Buddha Kingdom would be the abbot of Du-Yi Temple? It was a well-known fact that the three calamities were invincible. Except for experts of the same level, he was almost invincible. However, such an expert was still defeated. He was defeated miserably and miserably. Although she never expected the Buddha Kingdom to have such a big impact on the war against Great Xia, she didn't expect it to be defeated so quickly. In the Weiyang Palace, Ning Chen was still unconscious and was unaware of the changes in the situation outside. The third prince and the 10th prince were trying their best to rope in the remaining nobles who were still neutral. At this time, no one was willing to fall behind. The battle for the throne had always been about the winner taking all. When one person ascended the throne, the other would definitely die without a burial place. This was also the main reason why the princes couldn't coexist. There was no kinship in the royal family. This had never changed since ancient times. After all, there were very few people who didn't care about the throne like the first prince and the Yan Qinhuang. In the court, other than the two princes fighting, there was another matter that was also placed in front of the officials. How would the Marquis Jiming be rewarded for his contributions? The origin of the Jiming Marquis was an unspoken secret. Everyone pretended that they didn't know. No one was foolish enough to mention it at this time. In the Battle of the Buddhist Kingdom, Jiming Marquis had shocked everyone. The dignified Buddhist kingdom was basically destroyed. The Buddhas in the mortal world suffered a crushing defeat, 3 Buddhist kingdom protectors died in battle, and all the precious ancient scriptures in the entire Mijia mountain were pulled back to Great Xia. It could be said that the peace of the southwest region of Great Xia was won by Jiming Marquis and his 5,000 soldiers. If this matter was not handled properly, it would definitely disappoint the soldiers of Great Xia. Hence, the matter of bestowing rewards became a huge headache for the 3 dukes. When the Xia emperor was still alive, he had suppressed Ning Chen time and time again. They had never considered this problem. Now that they were counting the merits of Ning Chen, they realized that unknowingly, this young man had already done so much for the Grand Xia. Everyone in court was paying attention to this matter, waiting for the final decision of the 3 dukes and the empress. Logically speaking, with such merits, he could already be considered for the title of Marquis. After the death of Marquis Wangchuan, one of the 10 marquises of Great Xia was empty. Jiming Marquis' strength and merits were enough to meet the requirements. 3 days later, the decision of the 3 dukes was finally made. Ning Chen was conferred the title of Marquis, and his title was still Jiming. The moment this decree was released, the court was shocked. Especially the 3rd prince and the 10th prince, who immediately looked at Weiyang Palace. Everyone knew how much power and influence a marquis had, especially when this marquis was the most trusted person of the empress. The final decision of the emperor's selection was in the hands of the 3 dukes and the empress. Winning the support of Jiming Marquis was equivalent to winning the empress's crucial vote. For the next few days, the 2 princes took the opportunity to visit Ning Chen in Weiyang Palace every day. Unfortunately, the latter was still unconscious, which greatly disappointed the 2 princes. "How long are you going to hide?" Xia Zi looked at Ning Chen on the bed and asked. "I don't know. I'll hide as long as I can." Ning Chen coughed as he replied. He had woken up 2 days ago, but because of the situation outside, he didn't show himself. As for whether or not he was conferred the title of Marquis, he didn't care. Zhang Sun also didn't mention it. If the first prince hadn't told him, he wouldn't have known about it. "First prince, I still owe you an apology." Ning Chen's pale face flashed with an apologetic expression. In the entire imperial palace, the only person he felt guilty towards was the first prince in front of him. "You don't owe me anything. You don't need to apologize to me. Everything was done voluntarily by me. It has nothing to do with anyone else." Xia Zi calmly said. Hearing this, Ning Chen deeply sighed. How could such a person be born in the imperial family? Mingyue, come here. Ning Chen waved his hand. Not far away, little Mingyue, who had been sitting at a table, heard the call and immediately ran over. Help me get my sword. Ning Chen pointed at a cabinet not far away. Oh. Mingyue ran over to the cabinet in front of the window and grabbed the ink sword scabbard. She tried, but couldn't lift it. Ning Chen laughed involuntarily. He had forgotten that this thing was still too heavy for little Mingyue. Seeing this, Xia Zi waved his hand and the ink sword flew out and landed next to the bed. The ink sword had already broken in two. It had been destroyed during the battle with Du Yi Temple's abbot, and even now, he hadn't had the time to repair it. First Prince, I've heard that the Confucian sect has a special forging technique. Is it possible to repair this sword? Ning Chen seriously asked. Xia Zi carefully examined it and nodded. There is, but this sword's material is special. It should be difficult to repair. After saying that, Xia Zi paused for a moment before continuing, I can help you bring the sword back to the Confucian sect to try it out. It might take some time. Then I'll have to trouble you. Ning Chen sincerely thanked him. This sword had followed him step by step until now, and it had a special meaning to him. If possible, he wanted to repair it as best as he could. All right, it's getting late. I'll be leaving first. Rest well. Seeing that the sky was gradually darkening, Xia Zi picked up the ink sword and bid him farewell. Okay. Ning Chen nodded. Suddenly, he seemed to think of something and said, First Prince, wait a moment. This is a Buddhist cultivation technique I obtained from Du Yi Temple's abbot. Perhaps it will be of some help to you. He knew that the Buddhist and Confucian sects had many similarities in terms of their teachings and cultivation techniques. The unbreakable Vajra body cultivation technique wasn't very useful to him, but it might be very useful to the first prince, who came from the Confucian sect. Many thanks. Xia Zi didn't refuse and took the cultivation technique. This thing was indeed very useful to him. After the eldest prince left, Qing Ning pushed open the door and entered. She looked at Ning Chen with a strange expression and said, When did you become so generous? Ning Chen awkwardly rubbed his nose. Wasn't he just feeling guilty? That's right. Big sister Qing Ning, isn't it inappropriate for me to stay in Weiyang Palace? After all, he was no longer a eunuch. If he stayed here, it would be troublesome for Zhang Sun. This consort isn't afraid, so what are you afraid of? At this moment, Zhang Sun walked in and reprimanded him. Ning Chen immediately shut his mouth. After getting injured, he discovered that his perception had decreased a lot. He didn't even notice that Zhang Sun had arrived. As of now, Zhang Sun was already annoyed enough by the two princes. He didn't dare to go against them. It was better to keep a low profile. How is your body? Are you feeling better? Zhang Sun calmly asked. Much better. Ning Chen nodded. I'm sure Zi has already told you about the Marquis position. In the future, the third prince and 10th prince will definitely think of ways to rope you in. Be careful. Zhang Sun warned. Okay. Ning Chen nodded again. Tomorrow, you can leave the palace. The new Marquis government has already been prepared for you. In the future, you will also be a Marquis of Xia. You must pay attention to the rules when you speak. Okay. Ning Chen continued to nod. Alright, go rest. This consort still has matters to attend to and doesn't have time to care about you. Tomorrow, you can leave the palace on your own. After saying this, Zhang Sun left without stopping. She didn't even have time to sit down and drink some water. Has Nyang Nyang always been this busy? Seeing Zhang Sun leave, Ning Chen softly asked. Yes, it's been like this for several days. As she spoke, a trace of worry flashed across Qing Ning's face. She was truly worried that Nyang's body wouldn't be able to take it. Ning Chen frowned slightly. It seemed that the matter of the two princes was more troublesome than he had imagined. What De Xia was most afraid of right now was a mutiny. One of the two princes would definitely be eliminated in the struggle for the throne. No matter who it was, it would be a big hidden danger for De Xia. Sister Qing Ning, what's the situation in Beichui City? Ning Chen suddenly remembered the letter that Zhang Sun had sent him in the Buddha Kingdom. After so long, he had almost forgotten about it. The Marquis of Taiping and the Northern Meng military advisor have already been negotiating for a period of time. The progress has been very smooth. The Northern Meng military advisor has ordered the army to retreat by 100 li. Furthermore, he has repeatedly expressed his sincerity in negotiating. Qing Ning truthfully told Ning Chen what she knew of the situation. She didn't understand military matters and couldn't see anything unusual. Hearing this news, Ning Chen frowned again. Previously, he wasn't in De Xia and didn't see the situation clearly. Now, the situation was gradually becoming clearer. Based on his understanding of Fan Lingyue, the matter of the peace talks was definitely a facade. If he didn't guess wrongly, Fan Lingyue was trying to numb De Xia, making De Xia lose the strong sense of crisis that they had always felt. The Northern Meng army was an external threat. If the external threat was too strong, De Xia would have no choice but to deal with it with all their might. The two princes would also temporarily stop fighting. Otherwise, De Xia would be destroyed. However, now that the external threat had weakened, the internal threat would erupt without reservation. Both princes wanted to sit on the throne of Xia Emperor. It was destined that it would be impossible for them to compromise. It was very likely that Fan Lingyue was waiting for the internal threat of De Xia to erupt completely. This was why he repeatedly showed weakness. Ever since the assassination of the Xia Emperor, this plan had already begun. However, the sudden invasion of the Buddha Kingdom had attracted all the attention of De Xia, causing them to have no time to carefully consider this matter. Chapter 127. Ning Chen sat on the bed, carefully going through the situation. He couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. Fan Lingyue had long planned all of this. The Buddhist kingdom was merely a chess piece used to attract the attention of Great Xia. However, none of them realized it. Instead, they thought that the Northern Meng army was afraid after defeating the Buddhist kingdom. The current situation was very similar to when Northern Meng first invaded. At that time, the Xia Emperor hoped to use external forces to draw out internal troubles and then resolve them together. Unfortunately, the Xia Emperor overestimated himself and also underestimated Fan Lingyue. Driving the tiger to attract the wolf, but he had no ability to subdue the tiger. Now, the situation in Great Xia had stabilized. The two princes wanted to first defeat their opponents and ascend to the throne before driving the Northern Meng army out of Great Xia. Especially after Northern Meng repeatedly showed signs of peace talks, this idea would only grow faster. Humans would always have too much confidence in their own abilities. No matter who it was unavoidable. Fan Lingyue used this weakness of human nature to force Great Xia into desperation again and again. This time, it would most likely be the same. He had no way to stop it. Even if he guessed Fan Lingyue's intentions, it was already too late. Regardless of the third prince or the 10th prince, it was impossible for them to turn back. The battle for the throne would only become more and more tragic. Thinking of this, Ning Chen closed his eyes and leaned weakly against the headboard. Fan Lingyue was indeed the most terrifying person in the world. He had already tried his best, but he still couldn't help Great Xia turn the situation around. Since the start of the war between the two dynasties, Great Xia had been led by the nose. His existence only delayed the worsening situation of Great Xia for a little longer. Now, almost half of the 330,000 imperial guards in and outside the imperial city were in the hands of the two princes. These imperial guards were the elites of the Great Xia dynasty, and their combat strength was far from what an ordinary army could compare to. At this time, it was impossible to stop the two princes. How to minimize the consequences of the battle for the throne was the most important thing. One of the princes had to die. This was the only and simplest way. Although it sounded simple, it wasn't simple at all. In the long battle for the throne, the two princes had already gathered a large number of experts around them. In addition to the military strength in their hands, how could they just kill them? Moreover, in this world, who would dare to extend the butcher's knife to the princes? Neither the three dukes nor Zhang Sun dared to give such an order. Outside, the sun had already set, and the night was gradually rising. A palace maid brought the dinner into the room. Mingyu had already washed her hands white and was eagerly waiting at the table. The little girl's thoughts were still very simple. The best thing was that the bad guy had woken up. Ning Chen tossed aside the worries in his heart and sat on the bed quietly watching little Mingyu eat. "Do you eat?" Mingyu picked up a snack and placed it in her mouth. She felt the bad guy's gaze on her, so she turned her head and smiled. "I'm not hungry." "You can eat." Ning Chen shook his head. He really didn't have much of an appetite. He had just eaten some porridge from the kitchen in the afternoon, so he wasn't hungry yet. "Oh," Mingyu replied. Then, she turned her head back and focused on eating. She liked the food in the Great Xia dynasty's palace very much. The way the little girl ate was pleasing to the eye. After all, Mingyu was the emperor of Northern Meng, so her etiquette was impeccable. Ning Chen looked at her quietly and didn't say anything. Only when he looked at little Mingyu could he calm down a little and lessen his troubled thoughts. The future still belonged to little Mingyu and the others. All he could do was try his best to preserve the hope of peace. Fan Lingyue's era wouldn't last long. The war between Northern Meng and Great Xia would also end very soon. No matter who won or lost, it couldn't drag on forever. "Mingyu, grow up quickly." Ning Chen sighed softly in his heart. Northern Meng and Great Xia couldn't endure the ravages of war anymore. They needed peace too much. Not long later, Mingyu jumped down from the table and ran to the bedside. She arched her eyebrows and said, "I'm full." Ning Chen reached out and helped the little girl adjust her little cloth hat. He smiled and said, "If you want to bathe later, just pull the screen. You don't have to be so fierce and chase the little palace maids away. Without my orders, they won't dare to come in." Mingyu's little face immediately turned red. She reached out and hit the former, saying, "You're a bad guy." "Ha!" Ning Chen laughed softly and didn't say anything else. Little girls also knew how to be shy. Fortunately, Mingyu was still a child and didn't have so many taboos. If she was a little older, he would have to be more careful when interacting with her. Not long later, a few palace maids and eunuchs brought in a large wooden tub for bathing. After pouring hot water, they left respectfully. Little Mingyu pulled the screen with a red face. Although it wasn't the first time, she still felt a little embarrassed. Ning Chen leaned against the headboard and listened to the sound of rushing water not far away. He thought of the woman who had also bathed here in the past. At that time, he had just entered the palace and was scared half to death by an assassin. He made a deal with her. If she didn't kill him, he would save her. He saw the assassin's face. It was a woman, and she was unbelievably beautiful. After that, they protected and supported each other, and did their best to survive in this unfamiliar palace. She was the first person he came into contact with when he came to this world. However, she had forgotten about him now. He didn't know why. He had wanted to go and find the answer, but he couldn't stop worrying about Zhang Sun. He was waiting. After the war between the two dynasties ended and Zhang Sun stabilized Great Xia, he could leave without worry and do his own things. Little Mingyu quickly finished bathing and came out. She put on her clothes and had a large towel on her head. "Help me wipe." Mingyu handed the towel over and smiled foolishly. Okay. Ning Chen took the towel and wrapped it around the little girl's waist-length hair, carefully wiping it bit by bit. Little Mingyu's hair was very long. A girl's nature of wanting to look beautiful was not something that would disappear just because she was an emperor. It's done. Ning Chen rubbed the little girl's hair and nodded. What a beautiful little girl. When she grew up, she would definitely be prettier than Fan Lingyue. After waiting for less than an hour, Mingyu's hair was almost dry. Ning Chen asked someone to come in and move the bathtub away. Then, he patted little Mingyu's cloth hat and said, "Go to sleep. We still have to leave the palace tomorrow." Okay. Mingyu ran to her bed obediently and lay down with her clothes on. At this moment, Ning Chen suddenly felt a tightness in his chest. He covered his mouth and coughed a few times. Traces of blood flowed through the gaps between his fingers. Little Mingyu looked over. Ning Chen quickly put down his hand without leaving a trace and covered it with the blanket. "I want to hear a story," Mingyu said eagerly. Okay. Ning Chen suppressed the tightness in his chest and told the little girl the story of Cinderella. As Mingyu listened, she fell asleep. There was a smile on her pretty little face. She was very beautiful and very cute. To little Mingyu, being born as an emperor was not a happy life. On the contrary, she felt very happy these days when she was with Ning Chen. No matter what era it was, a little girl of this age would always be the apple of her parents' eye. She would always be held in her parents' hands. However, little Mingyu didn't have parents. She only had to learn how to govern a country and read endless memorials every day. Fan Lingyue knew that she did not have much time left. Therefore, she tried her best to pave the way for little Mingyu. This also increased the little girl's burden. Ning Chen and Fan Lingyue had different views. He preferred to use actions and words to educate little Mingyu. He never took the initiative to force anything. This was little Mingyu's most beautiful age. He hoped that the little girl could live happily and not live under a burden every day. The night gradually deepened. Ning Chen sat on the bed and quietly thought about the future. No matter what, he had to help his eldest grandson get through this difficult time. Suppressed coughs came one after another. Traces of blood dripped down. He fought with Buddha and survived the calamity of death, but he could not overcome the living punishment. The night passed quickly. After dawn, a carriage appeared in Wei Yang Palace. It then carried Ning Chen and little Mingyu to the new Marquis residence outside the palace. The two of them left in a very low-key manner. However, they still could not avoid the attention of people who wanted to see them. The 3rd prince and the 10th prince sent over visiting cards on the same day. Ning Chen looked at the 2 cards with almost the same content. His eyes narrowed. They were forcing him to make a choice. His position was destined to not waver for long. Now, other than a few marquises who were fighting outside, basically all the nobles had already taken their positions. He could not stay alone in the imperial court. He was the only marquis in the capital. The 2 princes would definitely fight for him. A marquis was different from an ordinary marquis. After being granted the title of marquis, they had the right to mobilize an army of less than 100,000. Even the princes could not have this kind of power. The Marquis of the Xia dynasty had the highest prestige in the Xia dynasty. From the first Marquis until now, the Xia dynasty had been fought for with their lives. It could be said that every inch of the Xia dynasty's territory had the blood of the Marquis flowing in it. The Marquis of the Xia dynasty could be hereditary, but the Marquis could not. Every Marquis had outstanding military achievements. Even the traitor Beiwu Marquis was no exception. This was also why the Marquis had such a shocking prestige in the Xia dynasty. It could be said that the power of a Marquis was not given by the imperial court. It was fought for by oneself. Without military achievements that could make the soldiers of the world accept, the right to mobilize an army of 100,000 was just for show. After the visiting card was sent, Ning Chen quickly wrote a reply. The content was very simple. His body was not well and it was inconvenient for him to see guests. He could not see the guests before he made a decision. However, half a day later, another visiting card was sent to the residence. Ning Chen was surprised and frowned. The one who had sent the visiting card was none other than the owner of the Lingyan Pavilion, Yuhan Yi. Not many people knew that he had left the palace. After all, not everyone had the ability to plant spies in the palace. It could be inferred that the person behind Yuhan Yi was not an ordinary person. Ning Chen thought for a moment and also politely refused. If he had not guessed wrong, the real owner of the Lingyan Pavilion was most likely related to one of the two princes. There could not be such a coincidence in the world. He had just refused and another visiting card was sent. Chapter 128. Yuhani didn't give up. The next day, she once again sent the invitation, but this time it was from Li Er. After not seeing her for several months, the little girl had grown a bit taller. The flower bud of the past seemed to be about to bloom, and there was a hint of a young girl's gentleness. 13 or 14 years old was the time for flowers to bloom. Ning Chen didn't want to see these children get caught up in a conspiracy. Yuhani's actions had once again angered him. Li Er, give this letter to your sister Yi. You can't peek. Ning Chen gently patted the little girl's head. Okay. Li nodded. After Li Er left, Ning Chen waved his hand and turned the invitation card in front of him into dust. It seemed that the person behind the scenes couldn't wait to pull him to his side. The battle for the throne had indeed driven these people a little crazy. There was only one sentence in his letter: if you don't want your Lingyan Pavilion, I can help you settle it at any time. In the Lingyan Pavilion, Yuhani felt a chill run down her back when she saw Li Er's letter. She hadn't thought that Ning Chen would be so ruthless as to not give her any face. She didn't doubt the authenticity of the threat in the letter. How could someone who could order the slaughter of tens of thousands of Buddhist disciples care about her little Lingyan Pavilion? How is it? Did he still refuse? A gentle man's voice rang out from behind a screen in the room. Yes. Yuhani respectfully replied. Then forget it. In 2 days, it will be the Empress' birthday. At that time, there will be plenty of opportunities. There's no need to rush now, said the man calmly. Yes. Yuhani lowered her head. In the Grand Sage Manor, the Grand Sage Manor wrote a letter and sent it to the Jiming Marquis Manor. Ning Chen frowned after reading it. What did the Grand Sage Manor mean? In 2 days, the Grand Sage Manor advised him not to attend Zhang Xuan's birthday banquet. It would be better for him to recuperate in his manor. It was impossible for him not to attend Zhang Xuan's birthday banquet. No one could say otherwise. But the two princes would definitely take the opportunity to win him over. That was truly a troublesome matter. Zhang Sun and the 3 dukes still hadn't decided on the next emperor. If he rashly chose now, he would definitely be scolded to death by Zhang Sun. In Duke Jingwu's mansion, Duke Jingwu also wrote a letter and sent it to Jiming Marquis' mansion. The meaning was the same, telling Ning Chen not to attend the Empress's birthday banquet. Originally, they did not want to confer the title of the 10th Martial Marquis at this time, but Ning Chen's contributions could not be suppressed. While they were worried about the situation in the imperial city, they also had to worry about the feelings of the great Xia soldiers. However, they definitely did not want to see a martial marquis from the capital participating in the struggle for the throne. The current situation in the imperial city was already chaotic enough. If another martial marquis were to join in, who knew what would happen? When Ning Chen received the letter from Duke Jingwu, he read it and put it aside along with the letter from Duke Taisher. Now that the Confucian head had written a letter from the capital, the next one would be the eunuch head. Sure enough, not long after, Duke Shiyu's letter arrived as well. The contents were exactly the same, telling him to recuperate properly and not get involved in these matters. However, her tone was slightly stiffer. Ning Chen's impression of Duke Shiyu was very ordinary. He was even less interested in the commanding tone in the letter. After reading the letter, he crushed it into pieces and had someone sweep it away. In this world, other than Zhang Sun, no one had the right to order him to do anything. The three dukes were no exception. He would definitely attend Zhang Sun's birthday in 2 days. As for the two princes, he would avoid them if he could. If he could not avoid them, he would just take them on. He could retreat, but it did not mean that he could retreat again and again. The struggle for the throne was not something he should be involved in. However, if he was forced into a corner, he would not care about such trivial matters. He had to listen to the words of his elders. However, it was not a big deal to be willful once in a while. At most, he would just bite the bullet and be scolded. Secretary Shi, the official in charge of recording the history of the Great Xia dynasty, was shocked when he recorded the youngest Marquis of the Great Xia. Ning Chen, spring of the second year of the Great Xia dynasty, was conferred the title of Martial Marquis, knowing destiny. 17 years old. The historian was afraid of making a mistake, so he sent the memorial to the Heavenly Mandate Palace and asked again about the age of the knowing destiny Marquis. After reading it, Zhang Sun only replied with 2 words, "There is no mistake." 2 days later, it was the 39th birthday of the Empress of the Great Xia. There was a family banquet in the 9-Palace garden. Not many people were invited, but many people came uninvited. Ning Chen was one of those uninvited. He did not receive an invitation. Instead, he received a verbal order from Zhang Sun telling him to recuperate in his residence and not to leave for the next few days. The meaning was obvious. There were already so many people at her birthday banquet. She did not need one more person. Just stay at home and rest. More and more people came to the 9-Palace garden. They were all powerful officials and their families. The original family banquet quickly became a court banquet. On the main seat, Zhang Sun sat upright. She wore a red and yellow court robe embroidered with gold and silver luan birds and phoenixes. The phoenix in the middle of her bun held a pearl in its mouth. The tassel under the pearl hung down gently. Her beautiful face, which had not been eroded by time, had a gentle smile, giving people a kind of inexplicable pressure. Just as the banquet was about to begin, light footsteps could be heard in the distance. Under many surprised gazes, 2 figures slowly walked over, one big and one small. Pear blossoms drifted down, but they were brushed away by an invisible force, unable to fall on the 2. Zhang Sun frowned without leaving a trace. Why was this guy so disobedient? He was injured and still not obedient. Marquis Jiming. The officials greeted him politely. Looking at the young figure in front of them, they all had different expressions. Ning Chen returned their greetings one by one. Soon after, he brought little Mingyue and bowed respectfully to Zhang Sun. Official Ning Chen greets the Empress. Marquis Jiming may dispense with the formalities. Please take a seat. Under everyone's gaze, Zhang Sun could not say much. She could only do things according to the rules. Thank you, Empress. Ning Chen stood up and took a seat. He then ordered people to deliver the birthday gift for Zhang Sun. Looking at the birthday gift in front of her, Zhang Sun's heart was filled with curiosity. She could not imagine what Ning Chen would give her. She was very clear that this kid did not have any silver. When he was in the palace, his monthly salary was all taken by her. Even the 100 taels of gold awarded by the Xia emperor was still with her. At that time, she was afraid that he would run around, so she cut off his silver. The officials also looked at the wooden box in front of Zhang Sun. They also wanted to know what this newly promoted marquis would give her. When the wooden box was opened, a white light shone brightly. It was as if a gentle moon had risen in the 9-Palace garden. Upon closer inspection, a pure white luminous pearl lay quietly in the wooden box. It was the size of a fist and radiated light in all directions. It was perfect and flawless, attracting the gazes of all the women present. They could not shift their gazes away. Zhang Sun was after all the empress. Her knowledge was not something an ordinary person could compare to. After a short moment of surprise, she immediately recovered and gently closed the wooden box. The faces of all the women present flashed with a strong reluctance. They subconsciously looked at Jiming Marquis, their eyes filled with a burning passion. The night pearl was a rare item. The one Jiming Marquis gave was even more priceless. Even if you had money, you would not be able to buy it anywhere. Beside Ning Chen, little Mingyu looked at the burning gazes from all directions. She despised them in her heart. Country bumpkins. Ning Chen naturally did not know what the little girl was thinking. However, in his eyes, this pearl was only used as a candle. It had no other use. He brought back a total of 21 night pearls from the Buddha kingdom. There were 4 large pearls and 17 small pearls. Little Mingyu asked for 2 pearls, 1 large and 1 small. She played with them in the palace every day, making his room lit up all day long. Jiming Marquis, you are very considerate. On the main seat, Zhang Sun said calmly and did not say anything else. It was impossible for him to praise Yi Futian. Yi Futian had come here against orders. How could he let Yi Futian off with a night luminescent pearl? Ning Chen was already used to it. He was not disappointed. It was good that he was not scolded. If he thought of anything else, he would be thinking too much. However, he could see that Zhang Sun liked this gift very much. Women always liked shiny things. Even a little girl like Mingyu was no exception, let alone Zhang Sun. After this brief interlude, the banquet officially began. First, Zhang Sun expressed his thanks to the officials for coming. He said some high-sounding pleasantries, and then the officials responded and continued the pleasantries. More than an hour had passed in the blink of an eye. Ning Chen's head was about to explode. Little Mingyu was also listless. She used to be sick of listening to such things in the palace. She did not expect to be tortured in Great Xia. Below the seats, the 2 princes looked over from time to time. One of them was slightly delicate and had a delicate face. He was dressed in a beautiful black satin robe with golden embroidery. A 4-clawed golden dragon coiled around the robe. His wide sleeves were embroidered with silver threads and dark cloud patterns. He had a white belt around his waist and his black hair was tied up with a white suet jade hairpin. The other one was tall and straight with a domineering aura. He had the aura of a martial artist and was at least rank 9. They were the 10th prince of Great Xia, Xia Mingri, and the 3rd prince, Xia Yanwu. In comparison, Xia Zi, who was sitting at the head of the table, was more low-key. Since he took the initiative to withdraw from the battle for the throne, the status of the eldest prince of Great Xia in the eyes of the officials decreased. Ning Chen just nodded at Xia Zi and pretended not to see the gazes of the other 2 princes. Besides Xia Zi, the 9th princess was still as beautiful as before. Ning Chen also nodded at her as a greeting. In the past, he was helped by the 9th princess when he went out of the palace. Although Xia Xinyu had her own plans at that time, he was indebted to her. The 9th princess nodded in response. She could not help but sigh in her heart. Who would have thought that the little eunuch who asked her for help in the past would become the noblest Marquis of Great Xia? Things in the world were changeable. It made people sigh. The officials present were also very conflicted. They were jealous but also fearful. The matter of the Buddha kingdom was no longer a secret. Under the numerous military exploits, it was hard to hide the ruthlessness of Jiming Marquis, the Buddha kingdom, his subordinates, and himself. In this world, other than Jiming Marquis, there was no other person who dared to lead 1,000 soldiers to attack Mount Mijie. The spies from the Buddha kingdom had already brought back the news. The once prosperous Mount Mijie had now been destroyed. The corpses at the foot of the mountain were so piled up that there was no place to stand. No one dared to look down on the delicate and even slightly immature face in front of them. Because they knew that under this young face hid a cruel and ruthless heart. Chapter 129. Ning Chen ignored the gazes of others. After greeting the first prince and the ninth princess, he sat there quietly and ate. He didn't even raise his head, acting as if he didn't see anything. Mingyu didn't know anyone other than Qing Ning beside Zhang Sun. She lowered her head and ate her own fruit. Occasionally, she would peel one and give it to the bad guy. Ning Chen took it and threw it into his mouth. The loquats in the imperial palace were really sweet. How long is your empress going to talk? Mingyu quietly glanced at Zhang Sun, who was politely talking to the officials, and asked in a low voice. I don't know. Don't worry about the elders. Just eat. Ning Chen replied in a low voice. Mingyu nodded and didn't say anything else. She continued to pick out sweet and sour fruits to eat. Thus, in the Nine Palace Garden, a strange scene appeared. The officials all had respectful expressions as they congratulated the empress on her birthday. The eldest grandson also responded to them one by one. At the same time, he asked about some of the officials' family matters to show the court's concern. Under the harmonious atmosphere, two people, one old and one young, lowered their heads and ignored everyone else. They were eating happily by themselves. Qing Ning found it funny. This guy was purely here to eat and drink. He didn't even know how to compliment her. However, at this time, a discordant voice sounded, May I ask if Marquis Ji Ming is already married? The officials were in an uproar. They all looked at the person who spoke. It was the head of the Department of Justice. Other than Marquis Wu, the most powerful Marquis, Anqing Marquis. Ji Ming Marquis' background was a well-known secret. Everyone tacitly agreed not to mention it. They didn't expect that someone would use this opportunity to mock him. Zhang Sun unconsciously frowned. It seemed that Ning Chen being conferred the title of Marquis had caused some dissatisfaction. Anqing Marquis was a deeply rooted aristocrat. His power wasn't small. He dared to openly challenge Marquis Wu. He wasn't completely stupid. The atmosphere gradually quieted down. Most people were waiting for Marquis Jiming's response. Marquis Anqing's mockery hit the nail on the head. If it was not handled well, today's banquet would become a joke for Marquis Jiming. Ning Chen unhurriedly peeled the loquat in his hand. Just as he was about to put it into his mouth, he suddenly felt Zhang Sun's piercing cold gaze. His hand couldn't help but tremble. He hurriedly passed it to little Mingyu and stood up. Mingyu happily took the loquat and ate it in small bites. She didn't take what had just happened to heart. The bad guys weren't real eunuchs. Besides, this kind of thing was too easy for him. The two smartest people in the world, one was Sister Lingyu, and the other was a bad guy. As for the rest, their levels were too far apart. Zhang Sun's eyes were a bit sharp. This kid was too infuriating. Others were bullying him, but he was still eating. Qing Ning looked at Ning Chen's uninterested expression. After thinking for a while, she roughly understood what was going on. In the past few months, the opponents he had to deal with every day were at the level of Fan Lingyue and Buddha in the mortal world. Now that he was provoked by a small character like Marquis Anqing, it was normal that he didn't take it to heart. Just like what he had said before, once a person was bitten by a dog, no one would bite back. During the banquet, Ning Chen was forced to stand up by Zhang Sun. He immediately glanced at Marquis Anqing and held back the disgust of biting the dog. He said seriously, Marquis Anqing, I heard that you have a daughter who is still unmarried. Today, I will formally propose marriage. After speaking, Ning Chen bowed to Zhang Sun and said respectfully, Empress, I hope you can be a witness. Cough cough. Mingyu choked and almost spat out the loquat in her mouth. The bad guy was really mean. Everyone's expression was also interesting. This time, Marquis Anqing's cleverness backfired. He was asking for trouble. Marquis Anqing only had one daughter who was 15 years old. She was indeed at the age of engagement. Zhangming Marquis' actions were to disgust Marquis Anqing. Granted. Dream on. Zhang Sun and Marquis Anqing spoke at the same time. One was calm and the other was furious. However, this was Great Xia. Zhang Sun's words were no different from an imperial edict. Empress, you can't. Marquis Anqing immediately appeared and knelt on the ground. Why not? Could it be that the Zhangming Marquis status isn't good enough for your daughter? Zhang Sun coldly snorted. These old bastards were relying on their ancestors' achievements to raise their noses to the heavens. They even dared to mock a martial Marquis of Great Xia. They were truly too arrogant. Because, Marquis Anqing was so anxious that his face was covered in sweat. However, he didn't dare say what he was thinking. The eunuchs of Great Xia were not allowed to be given titles. That was a rule passed down by their ancestors. The Great Xia Emperor had broken that rule, but at that time, no one dared to go against him. All the officials had tacitly agreed. Now, if he dared to reveal it, it would be a slap to the Great Xia Emperor's face. Empress, I misspoke just now. Please retract your order. Marquis Anqing had no choice but to kowtow and beg. He only had one daughter and had always treated her as the apple of his eye. How could he just watch as she was pushed into a pit of fire? Zhang Sun coldly looked at Marquis Anqing. She didn't say anything. If a misspoken sentence could resolve the problem, then she didn't need to be the empress anymore. Whether it was for public or private reasons, this matter couldn't be resolved like this. Publicly, Ning Chen was the martial Marquis of Great Xia. How could he allow others to ridicule him? Privately, Ning Chen had been raised by her. She could beat him or scold him, but others couldn't. Marquis Anqing, you're getting old. It's time for you to enjoy your life, said Zhang Sun indifferently. An uproar broke out below. Marquis Anqing's body trembled and his face turned pale. Mother, you can't. The 10th prince immediately walked out to plead. Zhang Sun sneered. As expected, she couldn't sit still. Marquis Anqing was part of the 10th prince's faction. Once he retired, it would be a huge loss for Great Xia Mingri. Duke Shiyu, what do you think? Asked Zhang Sun calmly. It's time for someone else to take over the position of Grand Secretary. Duke Shiyu gently waved her fan and replied. He knew that the Empress had already made up her mind. Asking him was just giving him face. He couldn't just ignore that. With that, the matter was settled. Marquis Anqing powerlessly sat on the ground, his gaze lifeless. A single mistake had resulted in such a result. He found it hard to accept. The 10th prince stood up and withdrew. Since the matter was settled, there was no point in pleading. Marquis Anqing had to be given up. During the banquet, the thoughts of the officials spun. It seemed the Empress had been dissatisfied with Marquis Anqing for a long time. But Marquis Anqing was part of the 10th prince's faction. Did that mean the Empress was already leaning toward the 3rd prince? Zhang Sun didn't pay attention to what the officials were thinking. She glanced at Marquis Anqing and indifferently said, since Marquis Anqing isn't willing to marry off his daughter, then I won't force it. This matter will end here. As for Marquis Jiming's marriage, I have my own plans. Ning Chen's heart skipped a beat. He had a bad feeling. Was Zhang Sun going to randomly match him up again? Empress, I'm still young. The marriage can be discussed in 2 years, hastily said Ning Chen. Zhang Sun indifferently glanced at him. Sit down. There's no need to say anything. I know what to do. Ning Chen helplessly sat down. The uneasiness in his heart hadn't subsided. He understood Zhang Sun's personality. She was as stubborn as him. Once she decided on something, it was hard to change her mind. This matter was troublesome. A trace of worry flashed through Qing Ning's eyes. Both of them were people who refused to back down. They wouldn't quarrel over this matter, right? Zhang Sun looked at the officials and asked, the position of head of Department of Justice can't be left empty. Who do you think can take on this responsibility? The officials were silent. After a while, the 10th prince signaled for one of them to come forward and recommend someone. He wanted to do his best to take back the position. However, the 3rd prince's faction immediately objected. They didn't want the position of head of Department of Justice to fall back into the hands of the 10th prince. Soon, the two sides began to quarrel. They even forgot that this was the Empress's birthday banquet. At the head of the table, Xia Zi coldly looked at the repulsive faces of the officials. The wine cup in his hand shattered into pieces. When did the 1,000-year-old Xia become so filthy? The two sides continued to quarrel. One side pushed the other, and neither side was willing to accept the other side's choice. Zhang Xuan's expression grew colder and colder. These people really treated the imperial court as their home. They didn't care about anything else and placed their own people in the position. Xia Zi glanced at Ning Chen and said, "Ning Chen, you take over the position of head of Department of Justice." This simple sentence didn't cause too much of a stir. However, it shocked the officials present and made them fall silent. Ning Chen furrowed his brows. He wasn't willing to get involved in this matter. Not only that, the name of Taisai wasn't too bad in Grand Xia. His reputation wasn't good to begin with, and he didn't want to add to it. "I have no objections. I have no objections." After a short silence, the 10th prince and the 3rd prince spoke at the same time. Their thoughts were simple. Since they couldn't take the position, they might as well use it to win over the Jiming Marquis favor. With the 3 princes speaking at the same time, the officials immediately shut up and didn't say anything else. Zhang Sun thought for a moment, then nodded without leaving a trace. Ning Chen was indeed the most suitable choice. He was smart, skilled, and ruthless. He was very much in line with the head of Department of Justice's style. There were many organizations within the head of Department of Justice that couldn't see the light of day. In Ning Chen's hands, they would definitely be put to good use. Currently, the battle between the 2 princes was becoming more and more intense. She needed to make preparations in advance and obtain more information and battle strength. "Do any of the officials have any objections regarding the head of Department of Justice?" Zhang Sun asked. "I have no objections." The officials all replied in unison. 3 dukes, what do you think?" Zhang Sun looked at the 3 dukes and asked. "We will follow Her Majesty's arrangements." The 3 dukes replied. Seeing this, Zhang Sun stood up and said seriously, "Jiming Marquis, listen up. I am here." Ning Chen helplessly stepped forward and respectfully said, "From today onwards, I officially appoint you as the new head of Department of Justice. You will be in charge of all prisons." Zhang Sun said. "Thank you, Her Majesty." Ning Chen knelt down to accept the appointment, accepting the most shady position in the Xia kingdom. After the appointment, Xia Zi was the first to stand up and earnestly said, "Don't disappoint Imperial Mother." The next moment, the 3rd prince and the 10th prince also stood up and congratulated, "Congratulations." "Ha!" Ning Chen lightly laughed in response to the 1st prince's warning. Then, he cupped his hands towards the 2 princes without saying anything. Chapter 130. The banquet was still going on. Ning Chen had just returned to his seat when he heard Zhang Sun speak. "Sinew, go pour wine for the Jiming Marquis." Everyone present trembled. The shock in their eyes was unparalleled. What did the Empress mean by that? At this moment, not only the officials, but even Ning Chen's expression changed. He could ignore other people's opinions and thoughts, but not Zhang Sun. Pouring wine wasn't a big deal, but Zhang Sun had just mentioned his marriage. Now that he had the 9th princess pour wine for him, everyone could see his intentions. Xia Xinyu was also stunned and didn't react for a moment. She even forgot to respond to Zhang Xuan's order. Xia Zi also stood up and was about to speak, but was stopped by Zhang Xuan's stern gaze. At this moment, Qing Ning's voice rang in their ears. A moment later, their expressions changed. Ning Chen's identity as a eunuch was actually fake. Don't make it public. The Empress is still thinking of a way to deal with this matter. Qing Ning continued. The first prince hesitated and looked at his sister. He couldn't decide for Sinyu's marriage. Yes, mother. Xia Sinyu came back to her senses and bowed in response to Zhang Xuan's order. Then she walked over to Ning Chen and poured wine for him. Ximing Marquis, please. Thank you, princess. Their gazes met and a light breeze blew past, blowing 2 or 3 pear blossoms between them, blurring their vision for a moment. Ning Chen took the wine cup and drank it in one gulp. Xia Sinyu poured another cup and continued. Ximing Marquis, Sinyu offers you another cup. The most beautiful woman in the Grand Xia looked at Ning Chen for the first time. Her eyes flashed with a complicated light. Please. Ning Chen's expression was calm and no one could see the changes in his heart. The 2 cups touched and a crisp sound rang out. Both of them had their own thoughts and drank the wine in their cups. After 2 cups, Xia Sinyu returned to her seat and remained silent. The Ximing Marquis is over 17 years old and has yet to marry. This consort wishes to betroth the 9th princess to you. What does the Ximing Marquis think? As she spoke, Ximing Marquis looked over with a sharp gaze that didn't allow anyone to refuse. This made Ning Chen and Xia Sinyu's hearts sink. The shock on the faces of the officials could no longer be concealed. Even the 3 ministers had strange expressions. The Empress's decision was truly confusing. Ning Chen didn't reply. His mind spun quickly. He didn't understand why Zhang Sun would suddenly have such a thought. What was the reason? Xia Zi looked at his sister with a questioning look in his eyes. Xia Sinyu hesitated for a moment, but in the end, she couldn't resist her inner thoughts and gently shook her head. She and Ning Chen had only met a few times in total. Let alone talk about marriage, they couldn't even be considered friends. At this moment, the 10th prince walked out and said, Mother, I have something I don't know if I should say. Speak, Zhang Sun said calmly. Xia Mingui glanced at Ning Chen and said respectfully, Mother Empress, although Marquis Ji Ming has outstanding military achievements and has been conferred the title of Marquis at a young age, he has been promoted too quickly and is easily envied by others. Now that he is bestowed a marriage, I'm afraid it will be difficult to convince the public. After all, we can't stop people from talking. Imperial Mother, this son also does not agree to this marriage. I hope that Imperial Mother will reconsider. Under the seat, Xia Zi sighed and finally opened his mouth to express his attitude. Since Sinyu didn't agree, he couldn't force it. Imperial Mother, this son also thinks it's inappropriate. For some reason, the 3rd Prince Xia Yanwu also spoke out against the marriage. After he spoke, the atmosphere quieted down. The 3 princes had reached a rare consensus. None of them agreed to the marriage between Ning Chen and the 9th princess. Everyone looked at Ning Chen. Right now, the decision was in the hands of Ximing Marquis. If he nodded, the Empress had already spoken. No one could oppose it. This was a great favor from the Emperor. Moreover, the 9th princess's status and appearance were impeccable. Ximing Marquis had no reason to refuse. However, a trace of worry flashed in Qing Ning's eyes. She understood Ning Chen. He would never agree to the marriage. However, the Empress's decree couldn't be changed either. Both of them were stubborn. Once they quarreled, the consequences would be unimaginable. Under everyone's gaze, Ning Chen stood up and said seriously, Empress, please take back the decree. There's no need to say more. I've already made my decision, said Zhang Sun coldly. She had watched the 9th princess grow up. Before the new emperor ascended the throne, she had to find a good home for the 9th princess. As for Ning Chen, it was time for him to get married. Xinu marrying him was already letting him off easy. Ning Chen's heart was heavy. He knew Zhang Sun had good intentions. In this world, marriage was always decided by the parents. Juniors had no right to interfere. However, he wasn't from this world and couldn't accept this kind of thinking. Empress, this humble subject already has someone he likes. Forgive me for not being able to comply. Ning Chen walked forward and knelt down. Impudent. Zhang Sun was furious. This brat didn't know what was good for him. Empress, please calm down, said Qing Ning. Shut up, said Zhang Sun sternly. Qing Ning was helpless. She could only step back. She was afraid this would happen. She didn't think it would still happen. I'll just ask you one thing. Are you going to marry or not? Zhang Sun looked at the kneeling Ning Chen. I'm not marrying. Ning Chen's expression was firm. Good, very good. Zhang Sun stood up and coldly said, Come, prepare the carriage to return to the palace. The Empress stood up, and two beautiful palace maids stepped forward and walked out of the pavilion with light steps. A golden canopy covered the flying flowers. Under the respectful gazes of all the officials, the golden and silver one embroidery fluttered with the wind and slowly flew away. The birthday banquet had begun peacefully, but it also ended peacefully in everyone's hearts. Zhang Sun left the banquet, but the look she gave him before leaving made Ning Chen's heart sink once more. All the officials retreated, and in the end, they all cast their gazes towards Ning Chen. This youngest Marquis of the Grand Xia dynasty could be considered to be in the limelight today. It was just that they didn't know if the emperor's grace would still be as vast and mighty as before after rejecting the marriage proposal. The third prince and the 10th prince walked over to express their goodwill. They also invited Ning Chen to their residence as a guest. No matter what happened today, the Jiming Marquis was still a Marquis. His influence on the future emperor was still immeasurable. Since he couldn't avoid it, Ning Chen didn't back down. He nodded and said that he would pay them a visit. The two princes left satisfied. They knew very well that whichever side the Jiming Marquis joined would have the upper hand in the battle for the emperor's position. After everyone left, there were only 4 people left in the 9-palace garden: Ning Chen, Mingyu, Xia Zi, and Xia Xinyu. Mingyu had already fallen asleep by the table. The remaining 3 each had their own thoughts. They didn't speak to each other and just drank silently. The wind blew outside the pavilion and the pear blossoms fell. Gradually, even the path back could not be seen clearly. The sky gradually darkened. The bright moon rose and illuminated the horizon. The bright moonlight reflected the white pear blossoms in the garden, making the 9-palace garden look like a moon palace. It was exceptionally beautiful. In the pavilion, the 9th princess danced in front of the moon. Her beautiful body and perfect face reflected the snow and emitted a sparkling light. Her dress fluttered and spun under the moonlight. She was like a fairy in the world. Her beauty was soul-stirring. Do you regret it? Xia Zi suddenly asked out of nowhere. Ning Chen was startled. He immediately laughed lightly and said, In life, there are things to do and things not to do. Since I've decided, I will never regret it. Lofty sentiments. Xia Zi also smiled. The two raised their cups and drank. What they drank was wine, but it was also a display of their appreciation for each other. I've always heard that the Jiming Marquis' martial prowess is extraordinary, but I've never had the chance to learn from you. Today, the opportunity is hard to come by. How about we fight? Xia Zi looked at Ning Chen, battle intent rising in his eyes. Autumn water flew in front of Ning Chen. Its cold qi was oppressive, reflecting the moonlight. My cultivation body is special. There's no difference whether I have a sword or not. Ning Chen stood up and slowly walked out of the pavilion. His battle intent erupted, causing the sky to fill with snow. Straightforward. With a wave of his hand, autumn water flew out. Xia Zi's figure also shot out. When the sword arrived, the person arrived. When the sword arrived, the person arrived. When the sword arrived, the technique also arrived. It was a short moment, but it was very fast. It was so fast that it was like a killing blow. Ning Chen pointed his sword at autumn water. He leaned slightly to the side and his sword finger slashed towards his heart. Xia Zi swung his sword back and blocked the sword finger. He then turned his sword around and attacked Ning Chen's right chest's death acupuncture point. Ning Chen's sword finger turned into a palm and a vast aura surged out. It passed through autumn water and broke through Xia Zi's chest. Bang! When the palm landed, Xia Zi's figure disappeared. Outside the Nine Palace Pavilion, pear blossoms flew everywhere. The two's figures separated and moved again. Afterimages swirled in the air as their techniques collided once again. Snowflakes, white flowers. The swordsman's brilliance only blossomed in the blink of an eye. The two were evenly matched. The more they fought, the more shocked they became. Inside the Nine Palace Pavilion, the dance had already stopped. Xia Xinyu stood in the pavilion and looked at the two peerless men amidst the snowflakes and white flowers. A dazzling light flashed in her eyes. Straightforward. The sword and palm collided. The wind blew the snow and the cold moonlight sprinkled down. Gradually, the two's cultivation body reached its peak. The boundless sea of learning. Xia Zi took a step forward and a vast aura of righteousness rose around his body. In the next moment, the golden scroll opened and golden words appeared one after another. The dazzling golden words emitted a brilliant light. Immediately, pear blossoms filled the sky. The powerful pressure multiplied. The Confucian school's secret technique had once again appeared in the world. Facing such a powerful technique, Ning Chen didn't dare to be careless. He turned his palm and condensed his qi. A vast wave rose into the sky and turned into the Milky Way. Bang! In the world-shaking collision, the entire garden trembled. Both of them retreated a few steps back. It was actually a draw. Straightforward. With this battle, this trip was not in vain. Looking at each other, they smiled and sheathed their swords. Xia Zi and Xia Xinyu walked away, leaving behind a garden of pear blossoms. Ning Chen carried the sleeping Mingyu on his back and walked away. He sighed in his heart with regret and regret. Of the 4 princes of the Grand Xia, the deceased 8th prince was known as the virtuous king. The 10th prince's literary talent was outstanding and made people look at him in a new light. As for the 3rd prince, his martial arts were unparalleled and his cultivation was comparable to the consecrators in the palace. In comparison, the 1st prince had never shown anything special. Instead, he made people pay more attention to his identity as the eldest son. After today's battle, he realized that the 1st prince was the one who hid the deepest in the Grand Xia. He had forcibly suppressed his sharpness for more than 20 years. If he was ruthless enough to fight for the throne, there would have been no suspense many years ago. Chapter 131. The next day, in Great Xia's Imperial Edict Hall, the sounds of an intense argument could be heard. Outside the hall, regardless of whether it was the palace maids, eunuchs, or guards, they were all frightened. No one dared to step forward for fear of being implicated. In Great Xia, the only person who dared to talk back to the empress was the Jiming Marquis. Qing Ning walked to the front of the hall and had the guards and palace maids withdraw. The group of people hurriedly left as if they had been pardoned. This really wasn't a place for people to stay. Every second was torture for them. You have to marry whether you don't want to or not. This consort isn't dead yet, so it's not up to you to decide. Inside the hall, Zhang Sun shouted angrily. This brat wanted to anger her to death. What was wrong with Xanyu? Which part of her wasn't worthy of him? If you want to marry her, then marry her. No matter what, I won't marry her. Ning Chen was also a bit anxious. How could someone force a marriage like this? Impudent. Zhang Sun stood up and angrily picked up a scroll from the vase beside the table to hit Ning Chen. Seeing that Zhang Sun was about to hit him, how could Ning Chen be willing to stand there and take the hit? Without another word, he ran away while resisting. A gentleman uses his mouth, not his fists. Qing Ning, capture him for me. Seeing that Ning Chen still dared to run, Zhang Sun became even angrier and shouted harshly. Sister Qing Ning, you can't help the evildoer. Ning Chen hurriedly said. Qing Ning felt a headache coming on. She glanced at the two of them, then at little Mingyu who had long since hidden far away. She quickly walked over and also hid to the side. She couldn't participate in this matter. It had nothing to do with her. Are you all rebelling? You don't even care about this consort's words. Seeing Qing Ning's actions, Zhang Sun was furious. These people had all grown up and even dared to not listen to her. Your Highness, please calm down. If there's anything, we can talk it out. Ning Chen isn't someone who doesn't know what's good for him. Qing Ning stood far away and tried to persuade her. These two people had been arguing for almost 2 hours and were about to fight now. She didn't dare to participate in this. In the corner, Mingyu was watching with great interest. In northern Meng, she had never seen such an exciting show. Qing Ning's ears were very sharp. She heard little Mingyu's murmurs and couldn't help but frown. What kind of people were they? Why were all the people who had been with Ning Chen so strange? He knows what's good for him. He is the most ignorant person in the world. Zhang Sun threw the scroll over and said sternly. Ning Chen dodged nimbly and avoided the picture scroll. He said unhappily, marriage is an important matter. Both parties must be willing. I've only met the 9th princess a few times. How can I marry her just like that? Bullshit. Zhang Sun was so angry that he began to curse. Since when did you juniors have the right to make decisions about marriage? There is no such rule in this world. I don't care. Other people are other people. I must decide my own marriage. Ning Chen refused to compromise. Without my approval, I want to see which family's daughter dares to enter your Wuhou government. Zhang Sun said angrily. Ning Chen was exasperated, but he had nothing to say. He had no relatives in this world, and only had his eldest grandson as an elder. If he wanted to get married in the future, he would definitely have to go through his eldest grandson. He was a very traditional person. Marriage had to be blessed by the elders. Whether it was in Huaxia or here, this was a rule that would never change. Nyang Nyang, you must be reasonable. You cannot use your status to pressure others. Ning Chen was not confident enough and emphasized. Mingyu's beautiful face wrinkled. It's over, the bad guy can't take it anymore. Zhang Sun snorted coldly, if this consort was unreasonable, would you even have the chance to act so impudently here? This consort watched Xanu grow up. Her appearance and character are more than enough to match you. What else are you dissatisfied with? Seeing that the enemy was too stubborn and could not be reasoned with, Ning Chen tactfully changed his reason. Nyang Nyang, I'm only 17. It's too early for me to get married. Moreover, I'm still a eunuch. It's not good for the princess's reputation. Hearing this, Zhang Sun frowned. The first reason was nothing at all. In the Great Xia, many men got married at the age of 16. 17 was not early. However, the second reason had to be considered. This lad's background was indeed troublesome. Xinu's matter could not be delayed. Before the new emperor ascended the throne, this matter had to be resolved. The imperial family did not have family. While she could still make decisions, she had to find a good home for Xinu. Ning Chen was the best candidate in her eyes. He was also the person she trusted the most. These past few days, she had been thinking of a way. She had to find a reason or arrange a suitable identity for him to shut the mouths of others. This matter is a bit troublesome. Let me think about it a bit more. Zhang Sun frowned as she pondered. Nyang Nyang, take your time. I'm going back first. Ning Chen quickly excused himself. He then gave little Mingyu a look and quickly walked out of the palace. It was impossible to persuade Zhang Sun today. The enemy was too strong. He had to go back and think of a way. The two of them left very quickly and soon disappeared from sight. On the way out of the palace, Mingyu looked at Ning Chen and whispered, "Bad guy, are you really going to marry that ninth princess?" "I won't." Ning Chen denied. Xia Xian Yu did not dare to resist, so he would do it. He was already used to being the bad guy. In any case, his reputation had never been good. "Then how will you get past your empress?" Mingyu continued to whisper. "I haven't thought of one yet." "Do you have any ideas?" Ning Chen asked. "No." Mingyu shook her head like a rattledrum. "I'm just a child. How can I have any ideas?" Ning Chen did not know what to say. He knocked on his head and said with a headache, "We'll talk about it later. There will always be a way." The two of them walked back to the Marquis' residence. Before they could sit down, an urgent letter came from the distant Buddhist country. Ning Chen immediately opened the letter. After reading it, his expression changed. The abbot of Du Yi Temple had been rescued. This happened 2 days ago. In that case, the Buddha in the mortal world had already been burned in the fire for 7 days. He was actually still alive. Ning Chen carefully read the letter. The letter mentioned that the blood traces on the blood vein sword had mostly faded. Without a doubt, the abbot of Du Yi Temple had been using the Buddhist energy in his body to resist the resentment of the blood vein sword. Buddhism and demons were natural enemies. Since the blood vein sword was basically useless, the Buddha in the mortal world was definitely not in a good state. Even if he was not dead, he would probably be an empty shell of the three disasters realm. Such a person would not be able to threaten the Xia in a short period of time. Moreover, after such a long period of recuperation, the Dean's injuries had already healed by 50 to 60%. After a few more days, he should be able to fully recover. Compared to this, he was more concerned about Fan Lingyue of Beimeng. It was about time for her to make a move. Thinking of this, Ning Chen got up and rubbed little Mingyu's head. "Mingyu, you play in the residence. I'm going out for a while." "Okay." Mingyu nodded obediently. After leaving the Marquis' residence, Ning Chen headed east. Walking on the streets of the imperial city, he looked at the bustling people coming and going. He sighed in his heart. Unknowingly, he had already been in this world for close to a year. The sounds of hawking from the stalls on the streets echoed in his ears. Ning Chen looked at the bustling scene in front of him. Step by step, he felt extremely complicated. A year in this world was not long, but it was not short either. Other than this bustling scene that had never changed, everything else had changed. "Brother, I want to eat candied haws." Not far away, a 4 to 5-year-old little girl dressed in green pulled the little boy beside her. A hint of longing flashed through her big bright eyes. The little boy pulled his sister, feeling awkward. He secretly touched his pocket with one hand. There was only 1 copper coin left in his pocket, and it was the money for the buns to go to school tomorrow. However, when he saw his sister's hopeful eyes, the little boy gritted his teeth and took out the copper coin from his pocket. Brother came to this world earlier than his sister because he wanted to take better care of his sister. The little boy bought a candied haws and handed it to the little girl without any hesitation. "Brother, take a bite." The little girl held the candied haws in satisfaction and handed it to her brother. Her big eyes were sparkling. "Brother doesn't like to eat candied haws. You eat it." The little boy secretly swallowed his saliva and resisted the temptation in front of him. Oh. The little girl was not old enough to distinguish between truth and lies. She did not think much and ate the candied haws happily. In the little girl's world, candied haws were the most delicious thing. Looking at the scene in front of him, Ning Chen's face revealed a faint smile. The simplest and most precious thing in the world was the feelings contained in the candied haws. It was like the most beautiful crystal, pure and flawless, without a trace of impurity. However, at this moment, Hiya! The sound of horse hooves swept past, and the entire street was suddenly in a mess. The passers-by hurriedly hid, and even Ning Chen was pushed to the side of the street by the panicked people. The red-clothed guards of the imperial court are here to handle matters. Unrelated people, get out of the way. The horses trampled on the street, creating a cloud of dust. The passers-by were frightened, but there was nothing they could do. Suddenly, he heard the sound of crying. Ning Chen turned around and saw the little girl who was pushed to the corner by the crowd. Her eyes were red as she looked at the candied haws on the ground. She was crying sadly. Beside her, the little boy's eyes were dim. Because he had no money in his pocket, he could only pull his sister and leave. Ning Chen's face instantly turned cold. Looking at the departing figures in the dust, his eyes were filled with killing intent. "Boss, give me 2 sticks of candied haws." Walking to the stall selling candied haws, Ning Chen paid and took 2 sticks of candied haws. Then, he came to the little boy and little girl, squatted down and said softly, "Those people just now were Big Brother's subordinates. Big Brother didn't discipline them well. Now, Big Brother apologizes to you on their behalf." The little girl looked at the candied haws in Ning Chen's hand with red eyes. She wanted to take it but didn't dare. She could only look at her brother beside her with difficulty. "Big Brother, Mother told us not to take other people's things casually. It's not good." The little boy was stunned at first, but he still politely rejected Ning Chen's good intentions. Then, he pulled his reluctant sister and left. Seeing the little girl looking back with reluctance, Ning Chen's heart flashed with a rare touch of bitterness. After watching the 2 of them disappear, an extremely cold killing intent gradually appeared in his eyes. The red-clothed guards of the imperial court, they really put on airs. The imperial court was in charge of the world's punishment prisons. In the past, it was Marquis Qingyu who was in charge. Now that Marquis Qingyu was deposed by the Empress, the position of the head of the imperial court was changed. Unfortunately, he was now the head of the imperial court. Ning Chen walked towards the direction of the imperial court. His face was cold. It had been 2 days. He should go and see his subordinates. Chapter 132. Within the grand court, the sound of horse hooves rang out and the door was smashed open. 13 red-robed guards rode their horses straight into the court. Whoosh! The red-robed man stopped his horse. There was not the slightest trace of human emotion on his handsome face. The red mole between his eyebrows was as red as blood and emitted a bewitching light. "Wugo, how is it?" Before they had even entered the grand court, an old man opened his mouth. His eyes were closed, and the traces of time were written all over his face. Whoosh! In Yin Wugo's hand, a blood-stained cloth bag was thrown out. It flew into the air and opened up. A human head fell down and landed on the table in front of the blind old man. After giving him his mission, Yin Wugo turned and left. He hadn't said a single word from start to finish. This Yin Wugo is becoming more and more unbridled. He doesn't even have the slightest bit of the Supreme One's rules. An azure-robed middle-aged man coldly said from below the blind elder. "Ha, but he and the 12 blood-robed guards have never failed a mission. Which of your azure-robed guards can do the same?" Across from the azure-robed middle-aged man, a bewitchingly beautiful woman giggled. "Humph," the middle-aged man snorted and no longer said anything. Although he was displeased, this was an undeniable fact. "All right, stop arguing. Right now we should be thinking about how to deal with this Ximing Marquis that the imperial court sent to me. That's the most important thing right now," said a white-haired old woman across from the blind elder. "He's just a brat. What's there to worry about?" "It's just that his luck was a bit better," said a robust man beside her. "Boorish fellow." Across from the robust man, a scholarly man gently waved his fan. "Yen Zishu, if you have the guts, then go out and fight." The robust man's expression changed and he angrily slammed the table. "Anytime." The scholar closed his fan without the slightest fear. Have you quarreled enough? The atmosphere was tense and the blind elder suddenly opened his mouth. The robust man and scholar immediately quieted down. The other people present also didn't dare to say anything. They calmly looked at the old man. This Jiming Marquis isn't simple. Furthermore, I'm sure everyone knows the person behind him, said the blind elder. Her Majesty the Empress. Everyone present thought of the most respected person in the great Xia dynasty at the same time, and their expressions immediately turned solemn. You want us to endure being manipulated by a brat? I, Jean too, am the first to disagree, raged the burly man. I don't agree either. Yan Zishu tapped his paper fan and agreed with Jean too, which was rare. I don't agree. I don't agree. The beautiful woman and the cyan-clothed middle-aged man also expressed their opinions. Ding Fu, what do you think? The blind old man asked. Can. The white-haired old woman was about to speak when her expression suddenly changed. She said in a deep voice, he's here. Before he could finish speaking, a white figure walked past. In the blink of an eye, she was already there. Her speed was unbelievable. Walking to the front of the main seat, Ning Chen glanced at the four people below and said indifferently, this is our first time meeting. I wonder if you can introduce yourselves to Ning Chen. Yuan Wang. Ding Fu. Zhao Ji. Lu Swan. Jean Tu. Swallow Book. The 6 people stood up and answered respectfully. No matter what, the Jiming Marquis was the head of the Grand Court Division appointed by the Empress and the 3 dukes. They still had to abide by the basic rules. Ning Chen looked at the 6 people in front of him quietly. According to the information of the spies, the entire Grand Court Division was controlled by these 6 people. Yuan Weng and Ding Fu were the 2 leaders. As for the other 4, Zhao Ji was in charge of intelligence, Lu Xuan was in charge of money, Jin Tu was in charge of killing, and Yan Zishu was in charge of organizing and guarding the important information in the Grand Court Division. Clear division of labor, orderly hierarchy, decisive killing, and orderly. This was his overall impression of the Grand Court Division. My words are very simple. From now on, this Marquis's words are in charge. Saying this, Ning Chen's aura rapidly rose. He turned his palm and pressed down. An unparalleled pressure suddenly pressed down. When he had just taken office, it was impossible to make the 6 of them sincerely submit. The only method was to ruthlessly suppress them with force. Now, what he needed was not loyalty, but fear of the 6. Ha! The 6 people's expressions changed. They all activated their martial arts to resist the pressure from Ning Chen's body. Ning Chen's expression did not change. He activated the life scroll and at the same time, he secretly increased the power of the other 2 cyclones in his body. For a moment, the temperature dropped and frost appeared. Peng peng peng, the stone floor under the 6 people's feet shattered. Lu Xuan, who had a weaker martial arts, had his mouth dyed red. He bent one knee as he could no longer bear the pressure. Humph. Ning Chen's eyes turned cold. He pressed his hand down. Suddenly, the thick earth chi appeared. With a loud bang, the 6 people all knelt down. Their mouths were stained with blood. From now on, the position of the Grand Court Division's head will be inherited by me, Jiming Marquis. I hope everyone will cooperate. Ning Chen waved his hand and withdrew the boundless pressure. He looked at the 6 people kneeling on the ground and said coldly. Yes. The 6 people lowered their heads and answered. Stand up. Thank you, Division Head. The 6 people stood up and looked at each other. They could see the complicated look in each other's eyes. None of them had expected Jiming Marquis to be so strong. However, temporarily enduring was not the first time for them. Can anyone tell me why the Grand Court Division sent out the red-clothed blood guards? Ning Chen's eyes stared straight at the blind old man and the white-haired old woman. Without a doubt, the decision-maker of this matter was definitely one of the 2. Although the other four each had their own extraordinary forces, their status was temporarily unable to contend against the two of them. The city master of Ing City secretly gathered troops and had the intention of rebelling. According to the imperial law, he should be killed without mercy. Yuan Wen respectfully replied. Ning Chen frowned slightly and sneered in his heart. If he believed this, he would be a fool. Everyone knew that the city master of Ing City was unyielding and upright. However, because of this, he had offended many influential people. The number of people who wanted him dead was uncountable. To the Grand Court Division, who was in charge of the imperial law, it was as simple as eating a meal. Who gave the order? Ning Chen did not beat around the bush and directly asked. Yuan Wang and Ding Fu remained silent. Who gave the order? Ning Chen coldly asked again. However, this time, there was a trace of killing intent in his words. Ding Fu sighed softly and said, "It was Marquis Yanqing." Hearing this, a bright light flashed in the depths of Ning Chen's eyes. It was now a crucial period in the battle for the throne. Any movement could cause quite a big storm. At this time, killing the city master of Ing City was a must. It was clear that if the Grand Court Division did not kill him, the death of the city master would definitely cause a huge commotion. The imperial court would also send people to investigate. This was the result that the person who gave the order did not want to see. It seemed that it was not a coincidence that he sat on the throne. Summon Yin Wugo. I have something to ask him. Ning Chen collected his thoughts and coldly said to the 6 people. The Grand Court Division, West Hall. The red-clothed Yin Wugo removed the blood sword. His expression was expressionless as he looked out of the silver window. Young master. Shang Han opened the door with a cup of warm water in her hand. She looked at the person in front of the window and softly called out. Shang Han, tell me. Did I kill another good person? Yin Wugo calmly asked. Young master's actions are not right or wrong. In this cruel world, killing people is just to live a better life. Shang Han looked at the already tired young master and couldn't bear to say this. Ha! Yin Wugo turned around and lightly laughed. In this world, only the person in front of him was his last concern. Only Shang Han would care about his happiness. Young master, please wash your hands. Shang Han softly said as she placed the water on the table. Yin Wugo walked over to the table and placed his slender hands in the water. Feeling the waves of warmth from the water, his heart sank even more. How could he wash his blood-stained hands clean? His life had already been destroyed. Did he have any other choice? The Grand Court Division head has ordered for young master to go to the Grand Court. A cold voice rang out from outside the door, breaking the rare silence. Shang Han's expression darkened. She knew that her young master's heart was once again enveloped by coldness. Wearing his red-clothed body, Yin Wugo picked up his sword and expressionlessly walked out the door. Shang Han, I'll have to make you wait alone again. Shang Han, don't be afraid. Young master, be careful. Ha! Yin Wugo pushed open the door and left. His red-clothed body was like blood. The red-clothed body floated over. Ning Chen and Yin Wugo looked at each other from a distance. They both had the same indifference, but different arrogance. After looking at each other, it was time for their auras to collide. One was strong, the other was stronger. Who would submit to the other? Bang! Around the two, the tables and chairs suddenly broke apart. The fragments scattered all over the ground. Extraordinary. Killing intent filled the air. The 6 people's eyes flashed, but they didn't stop him. They wanted to see just how strong this Jiming Marquis was. Dang! His sword finger met the blood sword head-on. The foundation forged by the life scroll was unparalleled. His 2 fingers met the sword's tip without any damage. Ning Chen's figure moved and instantly appeared behind Yin Wugo. His sword finger condensed into a dazzling silver light. His move was swift and fierce, causing everyone's expression to change. Expert. The blood sword turned and blocked the fatal move. Then Yin Wugo's figure quickly turned. His sword moved and his body moved. He didn't fall behind in the slightest. Ding dang. Sword light swirled in the air. Killing intent scattered. The brilliant battle was dazzling. No one could move their eyes away. Ning Chen focused. His sword finger condensed into a dazzling silver light. A waterfall of frost drifted down. The sky was filled with snow. Ha! With a light shout, Yin Wugo didn't dare to be careless. He pushed his cultivation to the peak. Instantly, the red mole between his eyebrows released a demonic brilliance. The scarlet-red light dazzled people's minds. The sword genius finally showed his strongest strength. Sword of blood light. The snow was flawless. The blood light was demonic. The two collided. Thousands of sword intents exploded. The two didn't give way. They forcefully resisted the aftershocks. Their auras surged. Yin Wugo and Ning Chen were very close. They could even feel the killing intent and coldness in each other's swords. Since Yin Wugo used his sword, you are the first person that I can't win against. Yin Wugo withdrew his sword. The light from the red mole between his eyebrows disappeared. He immediately knelt down on one knee and said, "Greetings." Ning Chen also withdrew his aura. Looking at the red-clothed youth in front of him, his eyes flashed with admiration. An extraordinary swordsman. However, in the next moment, Ning Chen moved. With a wave of his hand, the silver light surged. In the sky full of snow, the red-clothed youth flew back with a bang. Blood splattered on the ground. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.